Hey everybody, I am Aidan Mattis. Welcome back to what is kind of a joint episode of the Lore Lodge podcast and the Weird Bible. Obviously, I am joined by the wonderful Wendigoon, Man of Giants, who has
Man of Giants, I like that.
two much larger YouTube play buttons than the fake one I have. We're on our way to the silver one. We'll get there. So today,
the silver one was cool. The gold one's too heavy.
It does look heavy.
It's fallen off that nail twice.
I'm guessing that's not a command strip up there.
Down here. No, it's not. It was what used to be, but that wasn't happening. But thank you very much. I do like that my 1 million subscribers damage everything in my home.
Yeah,
it's very satisfying.
That's the way it goes. I mean, think about it, in like 50 years, your grandkids are going to be like, Papa Goon, how'd you get that? And you're going to be like, well, back in the day, before the collapse of the entire world.
Back before the giants rose from the earth and overthrew the earth government, there's this thing called YouTube. And I tried to tell everyone, but they didn't listen. And that's why we're alive and they're not. Yeah.
Exactly. See? The lizard people will get everyone but us. But so today, as promised to several people who asked about when the next Weird Bible podcast would be, we're doing the Book of Job. And the first time I ever read the Book of Job all the way through was, I was in 11th grade, so it would have been 2015. And it was hefty. It was not for a Bible class. It was for, oddly enough, honors European Lit. I'm not really sure how we ended up talking about the Book of Job. We also read Things Fall Apart, which is an African book. We somehow ended up in a weird space where we were discussing everything but European literature. Somehow the Count of Monte Cristo and the Odyssey all ended up in this same unit with the Book of Job. But it was interesting reading it in a public school setting because it was just constant. The whole thing was criticism. Everyone was criticizing the book. The whole thing was, how can God be this? How can he allow this kind of thing to happen? How can this be an all-loving God? And I think that that's definitely a bit of an issue with this book because it's very easy to misunderstand. It's very easy to read it and come to that conclusion. Well, if God loves us, how can God allow this kind of thing to happen? And I think that that's kind of the whole point of the book, in my opinion. I don't know what you think, but in my opinion, the whole point of this book is to explain why do righteous people suffer? What is the point of suffering? How does suffering improve us and not just cause us issues? A lot of people, of course, forget that Christians and Jews both believe in an afterlife, so this whole thing we're doing right now is temporary. But, of course, it goes on into secular life and people have questions. So, I don't know. Would you be in agreement about the purpose of the book?
Yes. I'll talk about when we get into the details of it. I would say it's not the thesis for all suffering.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say it's the thesis for spiritual trial,
right.
Which I'll explain in a little bit. But yes, for the most part.
Sorry, I take a drink from my giant Eagles cup.
I also want everyone to know that immediately before we started, like Aidan and I were chilling out in here, then like 30 seconds before we went live, he's like, hey, so this mostly won't be a history one. You're good with explaining the concepts of Job, right? Anyway, and we are live. Hey, everyone.
I did ask you several hours ago.
I know.
I was perfectly happy to do something else. Well, I also didn't realize how much trouble I was going to have. I thought it was going to be a lot easier to dive into the history and really, touch on it and explain it. It was not, because
yes, the history of Job. What an easy subject.
I mean, the history from like a biblical history perspective, it's not that hard to date it and figure out, like where'd this come from and all of that. It enters history in a like extant sense around I believe the 5th or 6th century BC. But does it take place then? It's hard to tell because there's a lot of terminology in it that fits more with Genesis than it does with Daniel and Ezekiel. And Ezekiel, of course, mentions Job and Daniel and Noah in chapter 14. And so that means, yes, Job has to have come before Ezekiel, but some Bibles also date Ezekiel before Daniel. So there's a lot of confusion regarding the history. What I was able to ascertain, though, though the date and authorship are uncertain, is that it takes place in an agrarian society where livestock is a like primary measurement of value. That's why we get like the first thing we learn about Job, other than how many kids he has, is how many sheep and goats and cows and all of that. And then we also get that he is dwelling in the land of Uz. Uz, of course, is also a son of Aram, who's a son of, I believe, Shem, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And so is it the land of Uz as in that Uz, or is it the Uz that shows up in Chronicles, or is it the Uz that shows up in, I think it's Lamentations? Just there's a whole bunch of possibilities here. In some versions of the book suggest that it's Edom, and then there's the War Scroll from the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is not scripture, but it does address a series of wars that will be fought between the Israelites and an alliance of the Edomites, the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Assyrians, all of these different groups. And so it's supposed to be that's an eschatological prophecy, but it doesn't give us a ton of information, because in that scroll it says that the land of Uz is beyond the Euphrates, which could mean one of two things. Either this is a translation error, or it was an error in terms of, people identifying things at the time, or it could mean that this person was writing from Babylon, and that's why it's beyond the Euphrates, to the west. Because if it were just saying Uz is beyond the Euphrates, it would be one thing, but it says that Uz as well as Moab are beyond the Euphrates. That's not possible, because Moab is directly across, is it the Jordan?
Yes, it is, yeah.
So that's too close. That can't possibly be the Euphrates, so it's hard to figure out exactly what they're talking about. We do know that the Egyptians mention the people of Edom and mention that they're nomads in 1215 BC on one of their stelas. So it's got to be between, because Ezekiel references Job, so it's got to be between the Babylonian captivity and the Bronze Age collapse. Somewhere in there is when we're dating Job to. Other than that, there is essentially nothing to go on historically. It happened sometime in that period. My guess would be that it would be earlier rather than later. But that's about what I can come up with. So we're talking about a period. It's a short period of 600 years.
Just throw a dart somewhere in there. I have heard a lot of people say that Job is the oldest book in the Bible, or one of them. And what I mean by that is that the actual writing of it is the oldest. So like Genesis, for example, is the beginning of, human history up until, where does Genesis end? Right around Moses, right?
Yeah, Genesis ends with Joseph, and then picks up in Exodus with the Pharaoh who does not know Joseph.
Yes, okay. So that period of time means that it's from the beginning of human history till the Egyptian Empire at least exists to some degree, and it kind of goes straight into Exodus, because as we talked in previous episodes, Moses is the most likely candidate to have written Genesis, so that would have been a while back. So the belief is that Job was the earliest written book. It doesn't portray the earliest events, and the reasons I've heard for that are what you talked about, a lot of the language being a lot older, a lot of the locations mentioned being a lot older, and it could be, as you said, like from the OG Babylonian Empire.
Yeah.
So old book.
Yeah.
Talking about some really old stuff. A lot of people are kind of confused by the placement of it. The Bible is not directly chronological, at least not the Old Testament. The New Testament kind of is. Whereas the Old Testament's more so like different accounts. Like, for example, when you read through Genesis and Exodus, you get one telling of events, and then you read through the stories of the tribes of Israel, and then you get to Numbers, which is a retelling of several of the events of Genesis and Exodus. So it's not chronological, so Job's placement doesn't mean it's like halfway through the Old Testament. Like I said, most people place it as being much older, especially concerning a lot of the events that happen in that story. Was there anything else you wanted to say about?
Not particularly in terms of the history of the text. Like I said, the language is much more similar to Genesis than it is to Daniel or Ezekiel or any of these later books that come from the Babylonian captivity period. Those seem to have a certain literary and linguistic style to them that just isn't present in the Torah. It's present in other parts of the Tanakh. So there's that, and then I think it's also just to note for those watching, when you're talking about the New Testament versus the Old Testament and compiling in chronology, you've got to remember that the New Testament is compiled over the course of like 50 years, from the death of Jesus in approximately 33 AD up through Revelation, which is written sometime between 70 and 90. So the New Testament is compiled in less than a lifetime. It's like a generation after the death of Jesus. The Old Testament, it was previously believed, and is still current scholarly consensus, that it was first written down during the Babylonian captivity, sometime in the 6th century or immediately afterwards. Or there's this new discovery that I mentioned on a previous episode, on a couple of episodes of various shows actually, the discovery of this tablet on Mount Ebal that is 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters, and it has a script that is cursing Yahweh, or not cursing Yahweh, is cursing on behalf of Yahweh. And of course in Deuteronomy, we get told that Mount Ebal is where you put the curses, so there's a whole bunch of stuff there. Now, it is dated. It has yet to be peer reviewed, but the preliminary dating for this tablet is around 1200 BC, which turns the clock back about 600 years, maybe more, on when the Jews were writing things down. So while the Dead Sea Scrolls may be the earliest extant versions, the earliest existing versions of the Old Testament, it's entirely possible that we had at least parts of it written down as far back as 1200 BC. So I think that's an important thing to consider, because we're looking at a possible 1200 years that it took, or at the very least 900 years from the Exodus all the way up to the writing of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the earliest ones, for this all to be compiled. So you're looking at a much different time scale of a lifetime versus almost a millennium.
Yeah, right. And that's one of the things that's interesting about a lot of the Old Testament story. I'll get more into this as I talk about the specifics of the story itself. But the New Testament is more so, well, it is a direct attribution for us as the modern Christians, or the people after the death of Christ, whereas a lot of the Old Testament stories to us are more so as, I don't want to say fables because that makes it sound fake, but sort of guidelines and stories of our history, pretty much, because a lot of the practices that we see of like tradition and abiding by the law, at least as Christians, that doesn't apply to us. So therefore, a lot of them are more of a story aspect than they are a direct application aspect. And Job is especially one of those, as I'll say. I wanted to say a couple things before I get started on this. For one, I know sometimes you have a hard deadline that we need to end by. Do you have a hard deadline this time? Okay, cool. Because I can ramble about this for as long as possible, which is why I wanted to ask. I also wanted to say, thank you very much. I also wanted to say, I think this is the most viewers we've had.
For Weird Bible, absolutely.
Yeah, 178. So thank you all very much. That's very cool. Yeah, appreciate it. So if you're good on that, do you want me to go ahead and break down the basic plot of Job, so to speak? So the story of Job, as we established, it's old. Not exactly sure when. But the first verse opens and says, "There was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job. And that man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. There were born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters." And then from there, it talks about what Aidan talked about, where it goes into detail describing like the oxen that he has, the goats that he has, thousands. Well, I mean, it says his substance also was 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camel and 500 yoke of oxen and 500 she-asses and a very great household, so that this man was the greatest of all the men of the East.
Not to immediately interrupt the story here, but what do you think about the use of 7 and 3 here? Do you think it's symbolic or literal? Because we see those numbers pop up a lot.
So there's a lot. I knew you were gonna ask that. There's a lot of questions when it comes to Job. And most of them, as we're going to talk about, revolve around the application or the spiritual implications of this story. To the degree that I've heard a bunch of pastors, and like not just like yokels, like studied men, be like, "Oh, well, Job is a proverb. It's like a fake story. It's supposed to be representative." Which, for one, I think is lazy. I think it's lazy if like, "Oh, story's complicated, didn't happen."
Yeah.
But one of the examples that they use for that is stuff like that, the direct numbers. sometimes you can get a little schizoid, at least I can, where you're going through and you're like, oh, the number said 3. The three,
numbers,
what does
Mason,
that mean?
what do they mean?
So I don't know if that's necessarily something to be picked apart here. It could just be a coincidence he owns that many, or it talks a lot in the Bible about how God blesses in 7 and 3. So maybe as Job was just a blessed man, he was blessed in 7s and 3s. Who knows? I try not to give it a ton of weight because if I do, I'll go insane.
Right. Well, that's what happened to Strong. I can't remember his first name, but the guy who wrote Strong's Concordance, dude literally went insane. Like, just connecting all of the dots. So many dots.
I remember there's this book. It was called like The Holy Number, and it was going through the Bible and like trying to connect every time 7 is mentioned. And by the end of it, the guy was like, I'm not sure, but I think I'm afraid. Like he had no analysis other than like, this is weird, guys.
There's a lot of 7s in the book.
There are, yeah. Some people have said that perhaps where it is like a divine number or a prime number or whatever, that whenever people were writing, if they didn't have the exact number, they would substitute with 7 or 3. Which, I mean...
We also get a lot of triads, like there's 3 sets of 40 years in Moses' life and stuff like that. Yep. I do wonder how much of this is, like the way I like to put it is not that it's a proverb or something totally made up, but more of a parable. Telling this story, and the way that I read this one is, there's a lot of stuff in there that I do question how literal it's supposed to be, but at the same time, if you look the way Jesus explains things in the New Testament to his followers, it's almost always, unless it's directly to the apostles, it's almost always through a story of some people doing the prodigal son parable, probably the best known one, where you have the son who lives in sin and he's not righteous and he goes off and does his own thing and comes back, and the whole point is, wouldn't you rather welcome someone back to the flock than expel them from it? And so I that's kind of how I've always read Job, so I'm just putting that out there for people, but to continue on.
So from there, it talks. So this guy, he's incredibly opulent. It says he's the most wealthy of all the men of the East, which East is relative this time, but the guy was incredibly wealthy. He was incredibly close to God, and it says, it was so, when the days of their feasting were gone about, Job sent and sanctified them, and rose up early in the morning and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus did Job continuously. I realize now that I missed a verse, but that's fine. The verse I ran over just says, his sons feasted in their house every one his day, and sent and called his 3 sisters to eat and to drink with them. So essentially what it was saying is that Job, his entire family's gathered around. They all live near each other. And it says that Job recognizes that his sons have committed sins, and he offers up burnt offerings for them. So Job isn't just a guy who follows after the rules of God. He's not just a guy who loves God, as it says, but he's a guy who, on behalf of his family, serves God for them. He's going above and beyond, which is the reason he's shown to have these blessings.
And he's a spiritual leader of the family as well.
Yes, yes, he is definitely the cornerstone of the family. Now, that's not the part of Job that everyone recognizes. The part of Job that everyone recognizes is in verse 6, where it says, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. Satan came also among them. The Lord said unto Satan, which I'm sure you have something to say about the use of the word Satan, right?
We covered this, I had inspiring philosophy on the show a few weeks ago, and he and I discussed this at length because we have very different opinions on what sons of God means.
Okay.
Although Satan here, I think, is in reference to a specific individual.
Okay.
No, I don't.
I agree too. I believe this is the Satan, so to speak, rather than just the what's the direct Satan, the adversary?
Yeah, the adversary, the opponent, the deceiver, or all various translations.
Right. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, this is the devil guy. It says, and the Lord said unto Satan, whence comest thou? And Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. Which is, horrific sentence that's bothered me to this day. I want to do a video at some. This is tangent. This is why I asked how long do you need, because there's several tangents. I've wanted to do a video for a while about the cosmic horror of the Bible, because there's so much of it that no one knows.
You come down on me for some of the things I say as being sacrilegious, and then you go and say the sentence,
Bro.
the cosmic horror of the Bible.
Okay, for one, biblically accurate angels, excuse you. But also, like, I was reading in Leviticus, where it talks about what to do with the household who has leprosy.
Mm-hmm.
It talks about the house, it speaks of it as a living thing. It says, like, its walls breathe with sin, and, like, its walls are hollowed out with sickness and illness. Mm-hmm. And it says when they step into the house, the holes in the wall are deeper than the wall itself. What kind of... What?
What verse of Leviticus is this? Because I'm going to pull out my interlinear so I can look at the Hebrew while we talk.
Okay, I don't think this is the... We need to stay on topic.
Yeah.
The Cosmic Core episode will come later.
Yeah, but that's my point, is now I'm, like, curious. I want to know what we're...
I think it's chapter 15. I do not remember the verses.
Nice.
I think it's pretty sure that's the chapter about what to do with people with leprosy. Anyway, so it's somewhere in there. I'm staying on Job. You're not derailing.
No,
this
no,
one.
I'm not. Go ahead.
Okay. So anyway, God asked Satan, "What is Satan doing?" And the part that made me go on my rant about that is it says, "Said, I've been going to and fro and walking up and down in it," talking about the earth. So Satan's essentially just been roaming around the entire earth. It says, "And the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job? There's none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil." So for one, this is... Sorry, I looked down at chat for a second.
You're good. What are they? Oh God,
And
what are they talking about?
someone said Junji Ito wrote Job, and I hate it. Anyway, just read 3 of his books, so that was a scary reference. Anyway, so for one, Job is such a servant of God that when the devil approaches him and essentially says, "Oh, I've been snooping around the earth, essentially trying to find some way to do wrong," God brings up Job as a perfect man. But Job just doesn't have a testimony. If God thinks of you as a perfect person, you're doing something right, like above and beyond.
Do you think he's talking perfect in terms of sinless, or like as perfect as man can be?
As perfect as man can be.
Gotcha.
Because it's very clear in the New Testament that Jesus was the only sinless man, the only like true perfection as a man. Because specifically his wording says, "A perfect and upright man that feareth God and escheweth evil." So again, I don't think Job was like a Christ figure in that sense. Just as perfect as man can be. I'm sorry that I put you on the leprosy train.
This whole set of things is just...
I know, it's so weird.
Okay, so it's 14. It's 14 where I just want to really quickly though.
Okay, fine.
I just need to...
I'm sorry, everyone. I'm sorry I did this.
"And Jehovah spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel, and you shall say to them, When there is a discharge from his flesh, he is unclean because of his flow." And I just hate that sequence of words with every part of my being.
You know what it's talking about.
I know what it's talking about.
I hate you so much.
It's just gross.
Those that don't know, advanced leprosy to that degree would cause these boils that would literally explode.
Oh no, this is 15. This is talking about reproductive organs.
Oh.
Yeah. You put me on the wrong chapter in the worst possible way, and now you've made me think of things.
I'm gonna keep talking about
the look of disappointment on your face.
Yeah, I hate you so much. There's a few places in the Bible that if like someone's a new Christian, they're like, "What should I read?" There's a few things I will never recommend.
Yeah, there's a few things that are not the
Job's
answer.
one of them. Leviticus is definitely one of them.
Yeah.
Just stuff.
Anyway, the problem is Leviticus sneaks up on you because you get Genesis and Exodus, and those are totally fine, and then Leviticus, and you're like, ah.
Yeah.
But yeah, Job. We're on Job.
We're on Job. Stop it, Aidan. Okay. So anyway, God essentially astutes Job as being this perfect person, or at least as perfect as a person can be, which is a lot coming from the creator of the universe. It says, Satan answered the Lord and said, Doth Job fear God for naught? Hast not thou made a hedge about him, about his house, and about all that he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. Put forth thine hand now, and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face. Essentially what the devil's saying here is, well, the reason that Job loves you so much, and the reason he's such a good person, is because everything's going good for him. If things were going bad for Job, then he would curse you to his face. He would just be another awful person. Mm-hmm. It's easy to be good when you're on top, right? So it says, And the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, all that he hath is in thy power, only upon himself, not forth thine hand. Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. And I won't read all of the verses that follow, but essentially what happens is Satan then goes to Job, and he begins to put afflictions on him. Initially, it says that his oxen begin to die out, and his sheep begin to die out. Then from there, it says that he becomes inflicted with these boils and these sores all over him. And things continuously get worse for him up until the point that one day when he's out in the fields, I think it says a whirlwind, right? Pretty sure it's a whirlwind.
I don't have my book open, but that sounds about right.
And it's, put forth thine hand now, and the Lord... and the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, he is in thine hand, but save his life. I forget. Okay, so after the first point, at first the devil goes to him and says, while he was speaking, there came also the fire of God falling from heaven, burned up the sheep, and consumed them. Then after that, after several of his goods are destroyed, it says, Then Job arose and rent his mantle. Renting your mantle, or essentially tearing your clothes, is a sign of mourning or humility throughout the Bible. And shaved his head and fell down upon the ground and worshipped. It said, Naked came I out of my mother's womb, naked shall I return hither. Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. All this Job sinned not, or charged God foolishly. So, Job has a level of faith that is hard to truly grasp. He hasn't had everything taken away yet. At this point, he's lost several of his goods, and what he says is, like, I also like to mention that he rents his mantle. It's not like this sinless, not sinless and, the
righteous
sense, but, right, yes, thank you. This righteous person isn't a statue. It's not like bad things happen to him, and he's just like, well, it just be like that sometimes. He rents his mantle. He's very depressed and broken by this. But what he says is the Lord gives, and the Lord takes, but through it all, blessed be the name of the Lord. So it says at the beginning of chapter 2, again there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, which I know is a whole. that phrase is.
We won't talk about it. I've already discussed it in other episodes. If you're interested in the Sons of God discussion, go watch the episode 51 of Lord Lodge. It's with Inspiring Philosophy. He's great. We have a whole conversation about it. I won't get into it here.
I know there's also a lot of people who have come to this from my channel. For those that don't know Aidan, if you think this sounds insane, this is the man's entire channel. So feel free to check that out. Anyway, it says, And Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. The Lord, which is a whole nother thing in itself, but the devil comes before the Lord. It says, And the Lord said unto Satan, From whence comest thou? And again Satan answers and says, From going to and fro in the earth, walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil? The same thing that he said the first time. And still he holdeth fast his integrity. Though thou movest me against him, destroy him without cause. And Satan answered the Lord and said, Skin for skin, yea, all that a man hath will he give for his life. Put forth thine hand now, and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse thee to thy face. The Lord said unto Satan, Behold, he is in thine hand, but save his life. Essentially, if you're saying that his flesh, if his skin is what matters to him, then you can do whatever you want to him, just don't kill him.
Yeah.
So went Satan forth from the presence of the Lord, smote Job with sore boils, and the sole of his foot unto his crown. So he's essentially covered in sores all over. Then he took him a potter's shed, scraped himself withal, and he sat down among the ashes. All right, so
Yeah, it's
the line about
it's
the
brutal.
potter, it's horrific. So potsherd or potsherd is essentially like clay, like sharpened clay,
Yeah.
so to speak, like a pot material. The guy is so miserable with these sores that he takes this potsherd and uses it to scrape the boils off of his skin.
Literally flaying his
Goes-
own skin.
Yeah, to get relief from how awful it feels. And it says it's from the crown to the sole of his foot. So this guy is in a horrific position. And after this, it says, Then said his wife unto him, Dost thou still retain thine integrity? Curse God and die. So his wife sees this misery and says, This is insane that you're in this situation. Why don't you just curse God and be over with? Just die. Just get this over with. Which a very encouraging
Not
wife.
a very supportive wife, I gotta be honest here. Like,
not the best. It says, But he said unto her, Speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. What shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil? And all this did not Job sin with his lips. It says, now when so Job's continuing to maintain his status, and again he essentially says what he said before, the Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that was come upon him, came every one from his own place. It names the places they came from. Says, when they lifted up their eyes afar off and knew him not, lifted up their voice and wept, and they rent every one his mantle and sprinkled dust upon their heads towards heaven. So they sat down with him upon the ground 7 days and 7 nights. None spake a word unto him. They saw that his grief was very great. Also want to mention, I was trying to find the verse and skipped over it. Job's family, who it mentioned as being sinful at the beginning of the chapter, they were also killed when his oxen were killed. The turning of events was Job runs out into the field to check the oxen. While he's out there, his house collapses and his family's killed. Then after that is when the devil's like, oh, well, he's still a good guy because he's not sick. So the devil was kind of reaching there.
yeah.
And it's after that. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it's like, it's just kind of, it's kind of a funny argument when you think about the whole concept of God being like, yeah, you can take everything he has, he'll still love me, and we just end up here where the devil's like, well, he's still alive, so at least he's got that.
Yeah, he's still.
If you just let me kill the man, he couldn't worship you anymore.
He lost his money and all his riches, and the devil's like, but if he's itchy, did we consider what happens then? Anyway, so that's the reason that I didn't make that clear. My apology. Whenever he rents his clothes and says, the Lord give, the Lord take away, it's a much more like over the top thing to say because he had just lost his family. And it's from that point when his wife says, curse God and die. It says when his friends come to see him, they don't even recognize him. That verse which says they saw him afar off and knew him not. He's covered in boils. He's laying among the ashes of the riches he once had, scraping himself with pottery in order to make the suffering go away. It says that they didn't even recognize him because that's the state that he was in. And his friends sat there with him for 7 days and 7 nights. So, rest of the book of Job, pretty much all of it, except the last half of the last chapter.
A lot of speeches.
It's the conversation that these 4 men have. The conversation between Job and his 3 friends. And obviously, I do not have the time, nor do you all have the patience to hear all of that.
It's a lot.
Synopsis, it's a lot. It's literally 40 chapters.
for those of you who did not have to read this and write papers on it for school, you're lucky. It was not an enjoyable experience.
So
it was more enjoyable than Job's experience, but
yeah, that's saying a lot.
And no, I do not want to summarize them. It has been years since I did that work.
All right.
You know it. You know it better than I do.
The very short version of it is that each of the friends present different arguments for how Job is to confront this. One of the friends is along the lines of his wife, where he's like, "Yeah, you should just tell God to, get rid of himself
Yeah.
and die. Like that's your best case scenario. Why don't you just die, Job? Another one of his friends is that Job should be angry. He should be furious against God. That Job should dedicate himself to fight against God. And the third friend wants him to do nothing, right? He's like, you should just wallow here in the ashes forever, essentially. Am I right?
If I remember correct, it's basically
it's
kind of nihilist.
It's pretty much the nihilist idea of like, man, this sucks. Anyway, like
you shouldn't curse God and die, but you also should just do nothing.
Just do nothing about it. Yeah. And then the third friend who's like, what if we fight God? Essentially what the story's doing.
Just a quick tangent. Have you seen the Reddit post from it's like r/witchcraft or something, and some girl is like, I went onto the astral plane to fight Allah, and we are not ready to face him. And it's just an entire thread of Reddit witches talking about how they're not powerful enough to fight God. It's...
I've not seen this.
Internet witchcraft is like my favorite genre of stuff. It's wildly unhinged, but carrying on.
Anyway, yeah, every time I read that stuff, it hurts, but it is funny. Anyway, so that's one of the reasons we talked about earlier, how a lot of people kind of interpret this as not being a literal story. I interpret it as being literal because, as we established, I'm very literalist with most of the stuff in the Bible. But here, one of the reasons that they do that is because each of his friends are presenting, I guess you could say, the three narrative arguments against continuing to follow God. One
suggestion I've seen regarding that is that the stories of what happens to Job, the first part of the book where God is allowing Satan to test him, were written first, and then the speeches were part of a later addition to the story that were bringing it into more of a parable territory, if that makes sense. That's one of the scholarly opinions. I don't know how I feel about it, but...
Yeah, so it's essentially, it's the idea that this part is literal, this part isn't, whatever. Again, assuming from my interpretation that everything's literal, his three friends are offering what is three natural human responses to a situation like this. I did everything right, I did everything as I was supposed to, and bad things still happened to me. Now, what's interesting is Job's narrative throughout the book of Job. So Job doesn't start the story, well, like I mentioned earlier, he rents his clothes. He's not like a statue. And whenever he first, I flipped through the 40. Yeah.
He displays human emotions, which is an important thing to note.
Exactly. Yes. He's not like a monster through this thing. As a matter of fact, the first thing he says, it says, after this, Job opened his mouth. This is after 7 days of silence. It says, and cursed his day. Job spake and said, let the day perish wherein I was born. The night in which it was said, there is a man-child conceived. Let the day be darkness, let not God regard it from above, neither let the light shine upon it. Let darkness and the shadow of death stain it. Let a cloud dwell upon it, let the blackness of the day terrify it. And he continues on throughout the entire first chapter to talk about how it shouldn't exist. Verse 10 it says, Verse 11, it says, why died I not from the womb? Why did I not give up the ghost when I came out of the belly? Why did the knees prevent me? And he continues to talk about he just shouldn't exist, which is, again, a very natural reaction to going through a level of tragedy like he did. And at the end of the chapter, he says he wishes that he would die. He says, for the thing that I greatly feared has come upon me, and that which I was afraid of has come to me. I was not in safety, neither had I rest, neither was I quiet, yet trouble came. And because I won't get into like the philosophy of it yet, but essentially what Job's talking about there is the purpose for the book of Job. He says, which long for death, but it cometh not, and diggeth for more than it that digs for more than hidden treasures. He's saying it would be a treasure at this point for him to die. So Job has a very human reaction to this, and that's where his friends' arguments come into play. But it's through his friends' arguments that Job changes his disposition. Whenever one of his friends approaches him and say, why can't you be angry? Why can't you hate God for it? Job essentially, again, he's still in torment. He essentially answers, well, I only exist. You only exist. My children only exist. And my wife only exists because of God. All of this, the entirety of the human experience, could not exist in absence of God. So who am I then to be angry at him for levels of that existence being taken from me. Another one asked him, well, why doesn't he curse God and die? And he essentially answers the same thing. And it's through the conversations with his friends, friends is a loose word here. It's through the conversations with these people that Job begins to change his own spirit. And then towards the end of the book, I feel like I'm talking too much. Do you want to take...
No, you're fine. I'm learning right now.
Okay, all right. So, anyway, near the end, which, fun fact, he talks about the power of the Leviathan and the beast of the deep, which is a whole... I'm not going to let a mention of Leviathan go by.
You're a big fan of them. I know.
I'm a huge fan of them. He says, I have to read the verse now, at the beginning of chapter 41, he says, "Canst thou draw out Leviathan with a hook, or his tongue with a cord which thou lettest down? Canst thou put a hook in his nose, or bore his jaw through with a thorn? He makes supplications unto thee, will he speak soft words unto thee? Make a covenant with thee, will he take down servant for thee?" He continues to lay these hypotheticals out. It says, "Behold, the hope of him is in vain, shall not one be cast down even at the sight of him?" Which, man, the Leviathan's so cool. That's a recurring topic in scripture. Anyway,
we got to touch on that in one of these.
We do.
We got to do a whole episode on biblical monsters.
Yeah, bro. Leviathan. That's why I said cosmic horror. You got onto me. But
I know. It was the term cosmic horror that got me.
I know.
The Orson Welles Bible translation.
I hate you. Anyway.
The OWT.
So, anyway, at the end of the story, his friends have given them this entire thing, and essentially Job has come to a recognition within himself. He's completely turned about face from his initial disposition. Again, it's 40 chapters of speeches they have among each other. At the end, at verse 42, in chapter 41, he talks about the power of God, why God's so important. At chapter 42, the last chapter of the book, it says, "Then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that thou can do everything, that no thought can be withholden from thee. Who is he that hideth counsel without knowledge? Therefore have I uttered that I understood not things too wonderful for me, which I knew not. Here I beseech thee, and I will speak, I will demand of thee, and declare thou unto me. I have heard of thee by the hearing of my ear, now my eye seeth thee. Therefore I abhor myself, and repent in these dust and ashes," which Job has talked about. The story opens with God essentially calling Job like the perfect man, or again, as perfect as man can be. Here at the end of it, Job is calling himself a fool. He says, "I had only heard of the miracles of God, but now I see the power of God. Things that were it says, too wonderful for me, which I knew not." Here it says he's mourning. He abhors himself for not seeing the power of God before, and now he repents in the dust and ashes, calling himself a fool, which is completely different from the guy we saw before, but Job elaborates on that. It says, "And it was so that after the Lord had spoken these words unto Job, the Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite," Eliphaz was one of the friends who was here the whole time, "My wrath is kindled against thee and against thy two friends," the ones who are trying to essentially talk Job into mischief or turning from the path, "for ye have not spoken to me that thing that is right, as my servant Job hath. Therefore take unto you now 7 bullocks and 7 rams," and he essentially commands an offering, which is a thing that happens in the Old Testament that doesn't apply to us now. Moving on. It says, "And the Lord turned the captivity of Job. He prayed for his friends. Also the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. Then came there unto him all his brethren and all his sisters, and all they that had been of his acquaintance before, did eat bread with him in his house. They bemoaned him and comforted him over all the evil that the Lord had brought upon him. Every man also gave him a piece of money, and every one an earring of gold. So the Lord blessed the latter end of Job more than his beginning. He had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 she-asses. And also 7 sons and 3 daughters. He called the name of the first," and it talks about the names he gives them, "and in all the land were no women found so fair as the daughters of Job. Their father gave them inheritance among their brethren."
So
After the
Can,
Go ahead.
can I really quickly interject on that?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
For those of you who aren't aware, I'm a Freemason. We have an appendant body for young
Get
women for young women called Job's daughters, which comes from that exact line in the book of how all of Job's daughters are the fairest in the land. It just occurred to me, and I wanted to bring it up because it's just one of those little
I
things.
know that. Interesting.
You also
Is
have
that
rainbow girls.
Is that before or after the goat sacrifice?
There's no goat sacrifice. I do like answering that question, emphasizing different words. Like, there's no goat sacrifice. There's no goat sacrifice.
That's
Like,
pretty good. I appreciate
just to
the humor.
screw with people. It's really fun.
Yeah, don't worry, guys. We've talked off camera, and he's told me that there's no goats. It's just the sheep. Okay, just the sheep. Anyway.
And that comes from Welsh tradition.
That's purely historical. No sacred meaning. Anyway,
That was the other thing I had. Speaking, just to not to totally derail, but the historical thing. You mentioned how they had to sacrifice the bulls. Part of the reason why the Romans were so hesitant to recognize Christianity as being a legitimate religion is because it was the only one that existed at the time that Rome knew of that did not involve sacrifice. So to them, sacrifice was an inherent part of religion. How could you have a god that does not require sacrifice?
You don't put sacrifice.
Yeah, like, because and the whole idea of Christ sacrificing himself was so alien to them that we basically through the implications of all of this, we learn that the Romans had that Christianity was a revolutionary idea for the time. So I just think that that's an interesting historical tie into all of this.
Oh, I will piggyback off of that to continue this and continue to waste everyone's time. In my Sunday school
All
class,
300 people seem to be enjoying it, so
300. Oh, 300. Very cool. Thank you all so much. That means a lot.
Thank you, guys.
In my Sunday school class, we've been going through the book of Acts, doing the study of it. And one of the most fascinating stories, I don't think it's brought up enough, is Cornelius. So Cornelius was the first Roman convert to Christianity, or at least the first one mentioned in the Bible,
recorded one,
in
yeah.
the biblical story. The first recorded one. And it's Peter directly who witnessed to him. And Cornelius, it says he was a man who sought after God, and one day while he was in his house, an angel came to him and said, "Go send for a man named Simon Peter." So Peter comes to his house, and essentially he explains Christianity to him, the idea of Christ. And Cornelius' response is exactly what Aidan says. He talks about, but how can this be for sacrifice? And how can you have what's his word, payment without sacrifice or whatever? And Peter says that there was a payment for it, and it was Christ, the one who was crucified. And Cornelius says, how could it be that a man I've never met loved me enough to be my sacrifice, to pay the penance for me? And Peter says that's the whole point. That's the whole reason all of us are here. That's the reason we're so on fire for him. That's the reason we have the Spirit, because he loved us that much. And from there, Cornelius and his entire family saved as the first converts.
Yeah.
And it's from exactly what you were talking about, that the idea of no sacrifices was so alien to them at the time. Anyway, so at the end of Job, so Job has gone through this entire thing. It says his life was doubled. He had twice as much at the end of his life than he did at the beginning. It says, after this lived Job 140 years, saw his sons and his sons' sons, even 4 generations. So Job died being old and full of days. So, the beginning of his life, Job had all of these goods. He was the richest man in the land at the time. And then Job goes through this trial. Then on the other side of it, he has twice as much than he did at the beginning. He continues to not only be blessed in his life, but to have a blessed long life. The way that says he sees 4 generations of his family carried out, which is a blessing in itself. And he died being full and old of age. But the most important blessing to me isn't obviously, having a family back and having, being able to see your generations is a big deal. But even more so than that is at the part I read at the beginning, where it says Job, as a human, says for the first time he recognized with his eyes the power of God that everyone else has only heard with their ears. There are a few people mentioned throughout the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, who really experienced divinity, who really experienced the power of God or what God is on earth. And every single one of them had it do something to them. Every one of them went above and beyond. It talks about how Saul directly viewed God. Saul, for those that don't know, murdered Christians for the Roman government. He was essentially a paid hitman. And then he saw God once and became an immediate evangelist, essentially, who went from town to town. He was the first missionary.
Beginning with him witnessing the death of Stephen, right?
Yes, yeah. That was immediately before he converted.
Yeah.
Which Stephen's its own whole thing. Did a Sunday school lesson on that. That's where it makes me emotional. I won't get off on that one right now. But so everyone who sees God directly is blessed, and they can't shut up about it. It essentially defines them for the rest of their life. And Job was one of those few people who had that blessing, but he had to go through this trial to achieve it. He had to go through this to see it. But through it all, Job never said anything against God. Job never attacked God. He wished for God to strike him down, but that's different. That's not a hatred for God. That's a pity of oneself.
Yeah.
And it's still, at the end of the story, doesn't say that Job sinned at any point for being miserable or for wishing death upon himself, because again, it's a natural reaction. But instead, Job maintained his faith throughout it. Now, before I talk about the philosophy, is there anything you want to?
I would like to address, just as a thank you, to two people in the chat. We had I'm gonna make sure I grab their names. Heavy Burn Man sent us $50 from Oregon.
Wow.
He is also named Aidan, so thank you so much for that. Now I'll actually be able to split the money from this show and send Wendigoon money for dinner. And Max Waters for $99.99 said, "You don't know me yet, but you will," which is honestly a little disconcerting, but I hope it's a positive.
This is fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you both very much.
We do towards the end of the show do a 30-minute question segment. And the way we do that is we answer super chats first, and then we get to any other questions that we can before we run out of time. Which tonight I suppose will be determined by when we get tired. So, but yeah, that's all I wanted to do. I wanted to make sure I said thank you to those people, and for everybody who's in the chat just hanging. Thank you so much for being here. It means a lot to us.
Also, so two things. For one, if you have questions, start leaving them in super chats now.
Yeah.
So we know to get to them, or if it's on your mind.
The super chat function does preserve it too, so it makes it much easier for us to find them.
Also, the current goal, which Aidan doesn't know I'm going to say this, the current goal is for Aidan to quit his day job. So my campaign is that we need to get enough views going, we need to get enough subs going, that Aidan can do stuff like travel for Missing 411 videos, and he could do this stuff, because Aidan's a fantastic presenter, and I really want him to be able to make more content. So show Aidan all the support you possibly can. He appreciates it, and I appreciate it too. Anyway, so, are you good?
Yeah.
Welcome, yeah.
Very kind of you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anyway, so you tearing up
a little bit. Not gonna lie.
Anyway, so that's the story of Job, right? And obviously the hard part, and I'll be honest, I'm a Sunday school teacher, right? People come to me with questions all the time, and they'll come to me with questions about, like, New Testament, any day of the week. I'll knock those out. Like, people come up to me and they're like, "Oh, what does this mean? What's Pentecost? What's the Holy Spirit mean?" I'm like, "Got you right here, this verse, blah blah blah." And a lot of the Old Testament stories are like, "Hey, why did Moses do this, or why did this?" I'm like, "Oh, well, that's because blah blah blah." And like, I love answering questions, but there's a few questions I hate being asked, or I dread being asked more specifically. Not like I get annoyed, but it's because I'm always afraid I'm not giving the correct information. Those would be questions of predestination, and I don't believe in so like predestination's the whole thing that like anyone who's supposed to be saved will be saved eventually. And the justification for that is if God exists outside of time, then he can see all of time front and back, so he knows everyone who's getting saved. The reason I don't like predestination is because everyone I've talked to who believes in it uses it as a justification to be lazy.
Yeah,
I've had conversations with people where they're like, "Well, I don't really soul win because, if they're going to get saved, they'll get saved," which is a horrible philosophy. I don't like that. So I'm like anti-predestination, right? But then people are like, "Oh, okay, so if God's timeless, then how does time work?" And stuff like that. Stuff like that's a little bit more tricky.
That's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. and the idea of omniscience and omnipotence, and then still the fact that certain things happen that, there are certain ways that it's phrased, and I often impress upon people the fact that while this is the word of God, it is also the work of man compiling it. So there could be times where something was misinterpreted, or there could be times when something was misrepresented. That's why I'm always very, very picky about what translation I use. That's why I hate the New International Version and the New Living Translation. They're both horrible. Do not use them. But yeah, so those two. But yeah, but the point there is, there are certain things that crop up, and I think people are very quick to assume that, God is ignorant of them, or God is choosing to allow suffering or something like that. Who, when you take a step back, first of all, God's omniscience is not something we can comprehend. Omniscience is not something that the human mind is capable of understanding when you think about it. We're looking at literally the idea of understanding and knowing everything that has happened, can happen, and will happen. And then omnipotence, in much the same way, what does that mean? Is God able to snap something into existence, or does it mean God is capable of creating the structure that creates something? Or, are we talking about magic, or are we talking about a Rube Goldberg machine? Like, what's that? And it is things like that when you get into the idea of teaching it to children, it is such a huge responsibility. And I'm glad you take it as seriously as you do, because I know there's a lot of youth pastors out there who just really do not. And
don't get me started.
Yeah.
I know a few of them. Someone made a point in the chat, I think, Fretful Gaze. They said, maybe God knows all the possibilities and we have the choice to pick those possibilities. And that tends to be the philosophy I go down, because, God can see everything. But it's also emphasized heavily, especially by Jesus, that we have choice, that we have free will. If you've listened to my previous rants on this show, then you know that I'm of the philosophy that the reason humanity exists is the concept of free will. Mm-hmm. Because, God had the angels and the other heavenly bodies, but he didn't have companionship. He didn't have someone to choose to follow after him. So without choice, what's the point of humanity? Mm-hmm. A lot of people are like, what's the point of existence? And my argument for the point of existence is the choice of returning to companionship with God. Mm-hmm. So choice has to exist. That's not just my opinion. That's mentioned throughout the New Testament. So my idea is sure, you can believe in predestination or whatever, as long as choice comes first, because that's doctrinal, and then beyond that, you can argue whatever semantics you want.
I like to think of it in some cases as like hitting the start button on a piece of code or something like that. Like, what it's supposed to do, what it's going to do, but it doesn't happen until you hit start. So, correct. Do you program in free will, and then all the possibilities of what could happen? There's a whole bunch of if-else statements and stuff like that. So everything that can happen and that can come to pass, but does that necessarily mean, like, with free will, there's now the possibility that any permutation of those things could happen? And I look at it as God knows every possibility, not necessarily, and it's people always expect. I love atheists talking about the simulation and the multiverse and everything. I'm sitting there like,
I love how
step further, guys.
I love how every now and then people accidentally invent the Abrahamic religion. Have you seen that? You'll have these people be like, I feel like all the energy in spiritualism is like a person, and I call them him, like a sort of father figure, almost like an omnipotent father figure, who cares for my existence. Like, you're so close.
You're getting there, man. You're like knocking on the door.
But yes, with I can't even remember what our original point was.
Well, while you think of it, I'll take the break to address a couple of super chats. Aiden Paladin said, money from one Aiden to another. Thank you, Aiden. I'll let other Aiden know of your generosity. Frostwolf01 for $10 said, thank you both for the interesting content, and thank you both for this podcast. This has helped me understand the Bible in a way I could never, and helping with my faith. And that's why we do it. That is the reason, is to help provide something that maybe you can't get in church. Maybe not, and it might be because somebody doesn't know how to talk to you about it, or that you're not sure how to ask the question, but to discuss these things in an open way that really works for everybody, and where you don't have to feel any sort of shame or guilt or something like that for trying to understand, but rather you're allowed to have questions, you're allowed to be curious.
I really appreciate comments like that, because not only as like a content creator, YouTuber, whatever, but just as like a Christian, that means a lot. So thank you.
Yeah. And Problematic Farmer said for 50, y'all should do a live reenactment of scenes from the Bible.
Which ones?
Yeah, which ones would be the real question there? Like, I wouldn't be opposed to it. I'm going to be down your way a couple of times this year, but
Yep. That would be pretty funny.
Yeah.
But thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Anyway, so I remembered what I was talking about. So you were talking about how there's a few questions I don't like getting asked, and I do take it seriously, because I don't teach like kids. It's like high school, college age.
Yeah.
But still, a lot of these people, it's the first time they've ever considered these things, or I'll be asked concepts about like free will, existence, whatever. Like, I could be the first person who's ever told them. So if I start them off on the wrong foot, there's no telling, where that will go. So I do take it very seriously. That being said, Job is one of those. Job is something that I am hesitant to. I did a study with my class, because most of them are very mature and been in church a long time, so it's not like the first time they've heard it. And it's one of those stories that I'm worried that part of my personal interpretation overrides what I say the biblical interpretation is. I try to be careful about that, like what I think it means versus what God intended for it to mean. But I'm fairly confident, this is the same thing I told my class, I'm fairly confident that Job is an application for a righteous and looking believer. What I mean by that, and this is one of my biggest issue with Job, isn't with Job itself, it's with the way people talk about the story. Because Job is viewed as one of those gotchas, right, against Christianity. There's a lot of those where it's not quite as bad, but it's along the same thing where people are like, oh, you're wearing polyester, can't wear polyester. It's kind of like eating shellfish. You're not supposed to eat shellfish, because they like heard a verse that was mentioned to one group of people.
There's like a line in Leviticus that applies specifically to the Jews of the time, because you're going to get trichinosis if you eat pork and it's undercooked. Like,
right. And they're like, ha, you're eating pork? Guess you don't read the Bible. It's like that whole thing, right? Job is also seen as kind of one of those gotchas, where people will be like, oh, well, you're reading the book of Job, or like, the book of Job is very anti-believer. It's very bad for Christians. The problem with it is, whereas the shellfish thing, I could be like, yeah, it was to a specific group of people. Law doesn't matter anymore. That's kind of what the whole Jesus thing was about. Like, that's an easy answer. But Job doesn't have as much of an easy answer as someone who's not a believer.
no.
So I want to preface what I'm about to say with saying this is not a story that I think is a not that you shouldn't hear about it if you're not an experienced. I like Aidan getting his dog to come in the background. Oh, there he is! Look at the boy.
He was just staring at me and wagging his tail, so it only seemed appropriate to.
It's not something that I don't want to say should be or try to be understood, because that's incredibly pretentious. It's not something that I would focus on. Not to say that you should be arrogant to it, but because it's a different application than what a lot of people think it is. It's not saying that if you're a Christian, you're a guinea pig who's going to get prodded every now and then by God. It's a greater purpose, and I believe what the greater purpose for that is that Job was an individual who was, I would say, as perfect, or probably the best, no, actually, definitely the best person alive on planet Earth at the time. Because if you're so good that whenever the devil's like, oh, I wonder how I can take down God, that God puts you as his front man, that's a level of faith and understanding beyond anything I could.
Yeah.
I don't know anyone who would consider themselves close to the faith of Job, that God picks you as his front man, right?
There's only a few people in the Bible who kind of get that treatment. It's like him, Enoch, Elijah.
Enoch, Elijah,
Jesus.
That's cheating. But yeah, it's just like a few people who get called to that degree, right?
And when you think about the billions of people who have lived, like, these are some pretty special humans.
Yes, absolutely. like so Job was above and beyond, right? I would never consider myself an inkling of whatever faith this man had. It's because of that Job is in the situation he is now. A lot of people hear that and they think, oh well, because he followed God, God essentially tipped him off or whatever. But that's the wrong way to look about it. And this is what I mean by it's not something I would focus on if I was an early believer or if I was someone who's just trying to figure out the Bible. Because as a believer, as someone who believes in God as much as I believe in air, or, you know, any other concept on earth, I see a righteous honor the position that Job's in. When I was talking to my class about it, the analogy I made was that of a soldier, right? We, in a lot of our stories throughout history or even American history, we see, we could take a story of a soldier going off to war. So I'm just being like a stereotypical American. Let's take World War II, right?
We think about war a lot here.
We think about war a lot. Think of like the soldiers who stormed D-Day, right? There's a lot of valor given to them. The idea of like, these men, they went out into the braves of battle in order to fight for your freedom or whatever. I'm not getting into the politics of freedom. You know what I mean? Yeah. There's an honor to that kind of class throughout all of history. Now, what if we take a situation where a soldier is drafted to a type of combat? It's a completely different scenario. It's viewed as almost universally an astute evil if a government or body takes someone against their will and puts them into a place of heroism, right? And a lot of people...
But we do look at those people as even more heroic.
Yeah, absolutely. As the individual, we think, wow, what these people who had to face these odds to do this, what a horrific scenario, but what brave men they are to rise up through it. But at the same time, we view the people who did that to them, who sent them over, as tyrannical, as evil. A lot of people view Job as a draft scenario. They view it as God was like, here's a punching bag, have fun with him, and throwing him to the devil. And if this was done to just some random believer, I would agree with that. I would say that this is like definitely not necessarily unfair, but it's tragic.
If you grabbed a random person off the street,
if you just if God was like, hey, there's this guy, he's in the city called Babylon, why don't you mess with him for a little bit? If it was like that, then yeah. Job was a different degree, was to a higher calling. And the way that I came to understand the book of Job is I ask myself, if I, believing in God to the degree I do, I don't have any doubts of the faith, I don't have any like complication with if I do something that's wrong, I tend to feel like repentance and know it's wrong. I try to follow after, God's teachings and all that. So asking myself, if God were to say to me, I'm going to put you toe to toe with the devil. Like you're the guy. Again, I don't think I have that faith, but if God's like, you're the man, you're going to be the front line to this. The devil is going to do everything shy of killing you, right? But story of what you do and the faith you have through it go on to inspire thousands of years of Christians and followers who come after you. And not only that, at the end of it, while you're still alive on this earth, you will experience the divinity of God. One of the few humans on earth to ever do it. Would you do it? Unequivocally, I would say yes, because a lot of people view, this is kind of a bit more philosophical, just direct Bible. A lot of people view achievements in life as being things like amassing wealth, living a long time, being happy, things like that. But from a biblical perspective, I see a lot more of the use in life as being value rather than time, right? I think of some of the most well-lived lives as being that of the martyrs. Think about the prophets who were killed early on. My first name's Isaiah, and my father named me after Isaiah after the prophet Isaiah, who was a prophet to the kings until eventually he was sawed in half because they didn't like what he had to say about God. That testimony of Isaiah lasted until 6,000 years later. My father decided to name me after that man. That is something to the stars. That is a reputation beyond anything I could imagine. I remember hearing an interview with Muhammad Ali, back when he was boxing. They asked him after a fight, Ali, if you could be remembered for anything, what would you want to be remembered as? Muhammad Ali said, I want to be remembered as the oldest person who ever lived. Which obviously, coming from Ali, he could say whatever. He's remembered as one of the greatest boxers.
Yeah.
But a lot of people have that same sentiment, that idea that, like, oh, well, a good life's a long one. And while that's true to some degrees, and those blessings also come with other blessings, I view more as the value of what time you do have compared to what it is. And I think there's several causes, like Christianity, that are worth dying for. So as someone, and again, this is why I say Job isn't something that should really be studied if you're struggling to come into the faith, which is one of the reasons that it annoys me it has the reputation it does. If I was in Job's place, I would want to have a reputation that's worthy of history, rather than saying no and letting the judgment pass on for me. But not only that, Job had his blessings restored to him. While you can't, if you lose someone, it's not like getting a new person replaces that individual. But to have your earthly blessings amassed, to have this testimony that's lasted from all of history till now, like we talked about, this could be before Moses. This could be the earliest story of the entire Bible. And for now, at the beginning of the podcast, when I said this guy was about it because God said, this is my man, that, yeah, what's that worth in years or time? So I think that Job was made a martyr. If it were me, and I can say the same about Job, because as it says, he was the most righteous man at the time, I feel Job would say the same, that it was worth it. Yeah. Worth the testimony.
Yeah. So. I mean, he's cemented in history forever now, like, as being one of the most righteous men to ever live, which is a pretty, in a human sense, that's a pretty incredible thing. And then in a spiritual sense, it's also on the same level. Like, there's literally nothing I can add to what you said because it was so beautiful. Like, I have nothing to add to that. That was an incredible monologue.
That's very kind.
You have at least one of those every time we do this show, where I'm just like, damn, that was good.
You tee it up for me. But yeah, that, like, again, that's why I don't hate that people know about the story, and I'm not like, oh, you shouldn't read that. But for someone who's struggling to learn about the faith, it's like, oh, is this what's going to happen? Is God going to, like, tee me up against the devil periodically?
We are giving you, like, the most extreme possible example of what you will go through, but you're going to go through, like, you had every qualification for a job and still didn't get it. What are you going to do now? Are you going to curse God, or are you going to keep trying? Or are you going to, like, strengthen your faith and push on? It's versus basically I think that's the very easy interpretation looking at it. Probably not the core one or the primary, the most important, but to look at it and say, well, if Job can go through all of that, I can get through this week. Like, that kind of thing. And that's how I present it to people when they ask, is like, yes, if you read this, it's going to sound brutal. But if you think about what the message is here, it's that even the most righteous will suffer. Even the most righteous might even question through that suffering. Yeah. And the key is to keep going, to keep believing, and to, understand that better days will come. That this isn't the end. These bad things that happen to you are not the end. You have the opportunity to push on. You have the opportunity to make something of yourself, regardless of how much you're struggling. And I think that's a very important message on its own.
Like, and isn't that one of the most beautiful parts of it, though? You said that, like, it's not wrong to interpret, because it talks about after this happens, Job wants to die. That's like, did I do something wrong? Like, I cursed the day I was born. Why do I even exist? Like, and talks about how blessed a treasure it would be if he was buried in the ground. Like, through all of that, at the end, God says he maintained himself as a man of the faith. Like, that wasn't a sin. That wasn't a wickedness that he went through. If temptation or doubt was sin, then Jesus would have been sinful, because Jesus was tempted in the wilderness. Like, we're all human. We're going to experience things that are wrong. But for Job to go through this level of persecution and then come out of it, not only with his blessings restored twofold, but to say, I have seen the glory of God. That's like the greatest upscaled version, right? Guy loses everything, then sees God directly and has it all restored. And then you scale that back to us, maybe not a perfect Christian, definitely not a perfect Christian in my case. I'll go through trials that during the time I question why is this happening? I don't deserve this. Why am I going through this? every single time that it happens, I've been able to look back at my life and say, oh, that's why. That this is the blessing I've achieved.
And
And like you
that's
said,
wisdom. That is what that is to have experiences, to have them negatively affect you, and then to look back on it and be like, all right, that's the lesson. Like, that is what wisdom is. It's to learn from your experiences.
I remember, not to get too personal with it, but I was asked by a friend of mine. I went through like nothing major, just like a breakup a while back, like years ago, and I remember like I had a friend I confided in, who I was pretty sad about, and he asked me years later. He was like, I didn't talk to him in a while. He's like, "You're doing really good." And I remember when he asked me, like, he was like, "You're doing really good." I was like, "Oh, the last time he saw me was then." And then I started thinking about my mindset at that time. And then I looked to now and realized everything that I learned through that made me the person I am today. The capabilities I have with all of that. And like in a situation where I am blessed enough to have this YouTube channel, I'm blessed enough to have like great relationships in my life. It's all stuff that I couldn't get to had it not been for those trials. So I like what you said, that Job is kind of the underlined, bold, super version of what could happen to anyone who follows the faith. Because if you've chosen, this is another thing a lot of people don't think about. If we have the freedom of choice, we're inevitably going to make wrong decisions.
Yes.
Right? Only thing that can push us back to right decisions or the right direction is a breaking of whatever path we were going down, right? If you have this amazing job lined up, or like if God's graced you with the job to have in the future, if you don't have other doors shut for you, you're never going to walk down that one. I never would have started YouTube had I not become discouraged with my college career and not like the direction that was going. And that's such a minor thing, but just like,
but it's real. Like, that's what matters. It's personal. Like, there's no one personal experience that's going to apply to everybody. So it's important to be open and like, here's where my life went wrong and here's how it got back on track. And I have a very similar story to you. I wouldn't be here hosting this show if it weren't for a breakup I went through in December of 2020. Like, there's a direct line of events starting there that leads to here. And did it suck at the time? Yes. Did it suck when I didn't get a job that I really wanted back in February? Yes. Would I be here if I wasn't put through those things? No, I wouldn't.
It's the exact, yeah, exactly. And what I find most comforting about it is I know that it's easy to say this when you're on top, like Job, right? It's easy to say it when everything's going well. But I hope that I am at the capability that if things go wrong again, I will have the faith. This is just another step to put together, because he's got me this far. Right?
Suffering is temporary.
Suffering is temporary. I was thinking about while I was reading through Job. Do you see I say it like I'm the first person who came up with it. Do you know Chris McCandless?
Yeah.
Guy who died while he was backpacking up in the north. There's a poem that he wrote his final letter on the back of. I forget what the name of the poem is, but there's a line in it that's stuck with me since I researched that story that I thought about for here, where it says, it's men in their final hours. It's talking about deathbed thoughts. And in the poem, it says to give up flesh and bone, make a monument that stands among the mountains and the stars, is mostly to shed weakness. To think about that situation with Job, like, yeah, Job suffered. He went through physical pain. He went through loss. But look what he gained for it. Not only seeing God and his blessings restored, but to be a monument of history that people still look at Job, even people who criticize it, they're like, can you believe what God did to his most faithful person? Or what God did to the most faithful man who ever lived? Like I'll hear
You're
people
still complimenting Job.
Complimenting Job, yeah, because of what Job went through, because of his discomfort, because of his loss, he still remembered. I have heard people who don't believe in a single word in the Bible say, that guy's got the patience of Job. It's just a phrase, the patience of Job, because that's what he was remembered as.
Yep.
Like I said, I would hope I would do the same scenario, but I know Job, being as righteous as he was in that scenario, he would have accepted it. It's not a soldier being drafted, it's a soldier going to battle.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that we can... There's a super chat in here that I would love to use as a segue if you're
absolutely
up for it. Yeah. From Curdle Frog 98 for £5 sterling. I've been trying to understand natural evil, so I was hoping if you could help enlighten me on how an omnibenevolent God can create or allow natural evil. Which, if you...
We're doing the tango.
I can take it. I can take it, yeah.
Okay, all
so,
right.
yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of what we were addressing with the free will scenario, where, yes, God is all-loving and all-knowing and all of that, but also experiences time and existence in a much different way than we do. For us, a lifetime is a snap of a finger for God. So what we see as, you know, all of this suffering through life and all of that, it's at the end of the road, there's an entire existence after this, as far as Christians, Jews, and Muslims all believe. We are looking at, you know, what we do here. It's not necessarily a test, but the idea is that there is something afterwards. So the suffering you undergo on earth is nothing compared to living eternally in grace and in the glory of God. So you've got to begin with that mindset that we're not, you know, this is not it. This is not the end. This is not all you're ever going to experience. So what happens on earth is not necessarily, you know, a permanent final thing for you to worry about. And yes, God may put you through suffering. God may expose you to suffering. I should rephrase that. God will never put you through suffering. God will allow you to suffer. You know, and a lot of people will say, okay, but what about, you know, what about 4-year-olds who are diagnosed with cancer? How is that fair? Where's the lesson in that? And it's not necessarily that God is trying to teach you a lesson. If you're 4 and you get cancer and you don't make it, God isn't teaching you a lesson. God is calling you home. I don't know what
why'd you have to say that? That was Stop it with the calling home stuff. This isn't fair.
Why is that not fair?
It's just, that got me emotional. Just the way you phrased that. I wasn't expecting that dump truck of a sentence. Man threw it. Man. Alright. Anyway.
Is that something you disagree with? Is there something you...
No. I'm about to cry.
Oh, okay. All right.
Like, yeah.
Well, you made me cry earlier, so it's only fair.
I know. That's why I can't be mad. Just when you said calling you home, I wasn't expecting that to get sidelined like that. What I would say is that in humanity's original purpose, again, as I said, I'm of the firm belief that humanity's original purpose was companionship, to have close nature tied with God. And in the garden, we were given choice, because if you, to make it in purely forms we can understand, if you were to build a robot, and the robot was programmed to do everything you say, is that robot a friend? Or is it...
Good point.
You could anthropomorphize it in your mind, but it's just following code, right? It's just following orders. That's not what we were made to be. We were made to be creatures that were capable of choice. It's not a relationship if the person is if they're incapable of leaving you at any point, if there's no trust, if there's no actual love there. And the purpose, that's again the purpose of the tree and the Garden of Eden, was because without it there's no choice to be separate from God. There's only different ways to follow God. The tree was the out. That was the choice to separate ourselves from God, and as man we chose to separate ourselves from God. Through that, it says that is the moment that death and sin came into the world. The function of death is not to make people suffer. The function of death is not to take away some aspect of this life. The function of death is, if one chooses to in life, return to that companionship that we were meant to be with.
Exactly.
Because of that, because of choice, because of free will, we've allowed it to infest throughout the world in different forms. Like, use cancer for an example. Think of all the toxicants. Think of all the metals, the different poisons that have been put into the air and in water and everything else by man's decision. How many people have decided to destroy something and the effects of it exist for hundreds and hundreds or thousands of years?
I think that's an important point, yeah, because you got to also consider that not, you know, just because something happens to an innocent person does not mean that that was solely God's decision. By giving us free will, he put us in the position where we have polluted our water, we have polluted our earth and our air. It's, you know, we're at a point where he was never going to snap his fingers and save us from ourselves. It's our responsibility in life to act in an upright way to save ourselves.
That's why like Jesus talked about the importance of being a steward of your planet. And I like the word steward. It's like God created this world, he created everything, and we're given ownership of it. It's not just like we get to do with it what we please, we're given the responsibility. Jesus talked about being kind to animals. He talked about not to make animals suffer. He's, talked, obviously they ate meat and stuff like that, but he talked about never putting the animal to where it needlessly suffered, or never, he talked about why it was important to steward nature. Because like we've been given a responsibility to take care of it, and a lot of people have messed up that responsibility because of their sinful actions or because of their choices to be away from God's gift. It's caused death and destruction to enter the world. The easiest example I've used is think of a drive-by shooting, for example. You have a group of people who have decided to do something evil, and they drive down the street and they decide to just shoot a random person, right? Is it that random person's sin that led them to death, walking on the side of the street? No, that's just a needless, sinful consequence of someone else's choice. And a lot of the times, our choices don't just affect us, they affect people around us. And here on this earth, we've been given the opportunity of free will, and we've messed that up a lot. That's where a lot of sickness, a lot of death, and pain come into the world. As Aidan said, that's not a punishment to the person who's affected. In some cases, it's man, you got me with that calling home thing.
Yeah.
In some cases, like Aidan said, in some cases it's removal from the evil of the world, and I think it's our responsibility. Not just that's why a lot of people I hate the stereotype that Christians are like care about nature, don't care about stuff. As a matter of fact, it's very direct in Scripture to care about things like that a lot. A lot of people haven't, and it's led to the consequences we have. So I would say that to answer the question instead of rambling this whole time, things like direct evil from a benevolent God because of the choice to remove ourselves from a benevolent God.
And I think there's, just to add a final tag to that, it's also there's one aspect I hear a lot is, what about children? What happens to people who die before reaching the age of reason? Which is kind of the biblical limit for, we won't get an age of what that is, but the age of reason. When can you think for yourself? And to me, in my opinion, if you think about the time that this was being written and the people it was being written for, in my opinion, that would be full cognitive development, which is age 25. So, if you take it liberally, there could be a very, very long time before which you're actually being, not to use the word punishment because of the connotation, but before you're going to be facing, judgment for your actions. At the very least, we're talking about children. If a child dies, they're not dying in sin. There is original sin, but they haven't sinned. They haven't done anything wrong. They have the Disney World fast pass to heaven. You don't need to worry about what's going on with the children. They're good. God loves them. They have not sinned. They are as pure as they can be. It is those of us who are given, this longer life, who have the responsibility to monitor ourselves and uphold ourselves in a morally upright and righteous way. Isaiah seems very disappointed with me for saying Disney Fast Pass
Disney
to heaven.
World Fast Pass to heaven. Oh my word!
Am I wrong though? Am I wrong? You can argue with me. You're allowed to argue with me.
Oh, you're right. That's why I hate it. If you're wrong, it'd be easy, but you're not.
Are you ready for a new topic? Because we got one. Or do you want to go back to Job?
I mean, with that final thing of what I feel the Book of Job means, unless you want to add on it, I feel pretty firmed in that.
I'm trying to fix my headset here. Yeah. I mean, we can. I think that's. Wow, we covered a lot of ground.
But
yeah, I mean, if we can just keep it going, because there's stuff that just kind of ties in here. And I'm going to ask you this one, and then I'm going to run to the bathroom really quickly. So I'll let you field it. But it's a good one. From Jetstream for $5. Do you think this is the first version of humanity God has created, or do you think that God has created universes before and then restarts every so often? So I'm going to let you answer that while I quickly exude.
Interesting. Okay. Alright, so between all of us, while Aidan's not here, Aidan's doing fantastic on the channel. I want him to continue to do fantastic, and I'm probably going to periodically donate money, but none of you all can mention it because this man needs to do this full time. He's fantastic. He has fantastic plans for like the Missing 411 series and all that, and he needs to quit his day job so that he can do it. And I'm determined to make this happen one way or the other. So this is my new sabotage plan, but it's a reverse sabotage plan. I think that's called money laundering, but that's definitely not what I'm doing, at least not on the record. So y'all got to help me with this. Anyway, he'll probably be back soon to pretend I'm answering the question normally. What was even the question? Oh, it was were there generations of humans before us? Anyway, I do not personally believe so. And again, a lot of that is because I take a very literal view when it comes to Christianity. So, for example, whenever it says in the beginning at Genesis, it says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. For me, that's enough to solve it. I feel like the concept, and I'm not saying that it's like wrong to believe it or anything. I feel like there's a few questions you could not only ask about biblical, nature. You could ask about anything that are just unknowable questions. Like, for example, the whole "what if your red is not my red" thing. Like, oh, what if like your red is actually the way I see green, but we both call it red? That's one of those like theoreticals that you can never know. You can never ask enough questions to get around. And the whole were there cycles of humanity before or after us, I feel like is one of those. I think it's a really cool topic, which if you saw my Conspiracy Iceberg series, I talked it up a lot. But totally lost my train of thought there. I was lost in Aiden's eyes. But I feel like it's
Beautiful
one of those
baby blues right here.
Yes, yeah. I feel like it's one of those unknowables, so I don't personally think so, but I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with it. Again, I'm not sure how you would even determine it, per se, if it were to, so.
Yeah, I have a feeling I know exactly what you said, and I just agree with you.
Yeah, there you go.
I think,
it's fine.
yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that at the very least, this is the first version of humanity and of the universe, or at least of the universe, and I think that the humanity question, you could maybe say that Noah onwards is humanity 2.0, but...
Yeah, okay, well, there was kind of a cycle.
I don't think that we were
recreated
at any point. Just maybe,
correct.
narrowed down to an extent. And I think that's...
New Genesis, but...
I think that's the story we're getting in Genesis is, humans are created, and then there's a catastrophic event, and then society restarts, but humans don't. Let's see. We also have one from Spicy Italian for $15 that simply says doggy. Appreciate that.
I see it, Kelly. Also, if you have questions, ask them now.
Yeah,
this is kind of
definitely.
question time. So,
we've kind of done a soft segue into question time. But since the questions are generally related to Job, it works. Plaz for $20. Thank you, Plaz. Says, reposting for visibility, game wreck for y'all. El Shaddai, Ascension of the Metatron, follows the journey of Enoch trying to bring justice against the fallen Watchers. Has some really cool and trippy segments. Well, if I can stream it, maybe I will do that. Been wanting to get back to Twitch streaming, so I'll take a look at that. Over on Twitch, I'm the Aidan Mattis. And so, I'll see about streaming that as well. Have you ever played any biblical games? Most of them are not good.
Most of them are not good. I want to play the Dante's Inferno game.
I remember when it came out, and I had questions.
People lost their mind over it because it's got all the women depicted as topless and stuff, but it's but they're like giant monster centipede things. That doesn't count.
It's not really. Dante is also not scripture, so depicting it is not blasphemy.
Correct. There you go. There's my justification. Can't wait to tell the Sunday school class.
Problematic Farmer $5 says, "Here's some monies." Well, thank you. I appreciate the question.
Thank you, Problematic Farmer. What a great name.
History Daddy for £5 says, "Love you guys. Closest modern humans have come to Alexander the Great." A big part of History Daddy's content is that he simps for Alexander the Great, so this is actually quite a compliment. Then he says, and if Atlantis is real, would there be any giants there? I mean, my belief about Atlantis is that it is the antediluvian society described in Genesis 6, so I would say yes.
Yes, correct. That's where the skeletons are. Yep.
Next
question.
There's a lot of people just saying giants.
In
all caps.
My people. It's my squad.
One guy goes, one bird, all stone goes, okay, so Job is that guy. Like the devil came down and went, "You are not that guy, pal." And he said, "Yes, I am." Like,
I am that guy. It is funny. It is the devil was defeated by Job's faithfulness, which again. Yeah, that's the point of the story.
Yeah. Heavy Burnman for 5 says, "How does one join the Discord?" The Discord link is in is in the description of the video. It just down in the little description area there. You can also shop sustainable products at Gaia Industries. They make bamboo products, and I highly recommend them. And then we also have a brand partnership with Target. So, Target. That's also in the bio.
Thank you.
Yeah. Isaiah, do you have a Discord?
I have a closed one. It's for the old patrons.
Gotcha.
There is a public one that is about me, I think, but I am dumb too.
If
I don't know
if there is anything you want to plug, feel free to do it while I search for the next super chat.
I'm also scrolling through the chat right now. There's a bunch of people making memes, which I appreciate.
Love memes.
Especially about Job. It's fine. I do love coming to this group chat coming to this podcast. And normally, like, in my head, whenever you were like, we're doing Job, I'm like, okay, people are probably not going to like it, blah, blah, blah. But then I come here and everyone's like, Job's that guy, the man,
yeah, exactly.
the boy, it's Job, which is very
People
cool.
are into it. People like it. Diane Yale for $50. Full disclosure, this is my grandmother. Says, well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So
thank you,
sweet.
Grandma.
That's so sweet.
We have one person said, can't donate on my phone, but I have a question. What would be a weird but really cool topic theme you guys would appreciate in a worship song? I don't listen to a ton of worship music.
A topic in a worship song?
Like a topic for a worship song to cover. A biblical topic.
Like, is this a sing-along? Like it's a biblical story?
I don't know. That's kind of like the... I guess like the theme of the song. Because for me, like the Christian music I listen to is like Reliant K and Skillet and Thousand Foot Crutch. Like...
Yeah, most of the Christian music I listen to is more, I don't want to say bluegrassy, but kind of like country or choir orchestrated. Most of the Christian music I listen to is like a lot of the old classics. I'm trying to think of a like very recent, because most of them are like old, like, God for the Lighthouse and all those.
I can definitely give you
the fire.
I can give people some contemporary like Christian songs to listen to if they're looking for new ones. Like Reliant K is fantastic. I don't know if they're necessarily contemporary anymore. They're from the 2000s, but I Am Understood by Reliant K, Therapy, Who I Am Hates Who I've Been. There's another one that's an acoustic one. That I'm trying to remember the name of, but it's from the same album as College Kids. But it's like an acoustic one, and the whole thing is about, accepting Christ and accepting God and living your life in a certain way. And the whole song is just very much like about understanding that you're not perfect and that you're not expected to be, and that the goal is to try and to put genuine effort forth. And that one just always sticks with me. I'll try and remember what the name of it is before the end of the show. But Problematic Farmer for $10 says, "I love the Bible." That's good.
That was good.
I know now. I know you're Jewish, so I'm assuming you love the at least the Old Testament part of it. Let's see. We've also got a lot of these tonight. For £2, Surf 4 says, "I hope God shares secrets of the Bible in heaven. It is my understanding that all will be revealed."
It talks about that, how whenever a believer goes to heaven, how they become knowing of all, like, the biblical secret stuff, which, again, a lot of the concepts we talk about have to be dumbed down. The very nature of the way we talk about them is dumbed down compared to divinity and eternity, stuff that we can't even really comprehend. Like, existence that is forever without blemish. what on earth does that mean?
There's
Like,
just no way to understand it.
yeah. So, but yes, all will be revealed to us. So
Yeah. Reynold Hughes.
it's kind of the whole goal, the whole long term
exactly.
destination. Yeah.
Yeah. So Ray says a podcast, Weird Bible, a podcast where Aidan and Isaiah try to make each other cry. That's kind of what it is, honestly, at this point.
Yeah. I thought I had him be, and then he hit me with the old one too. Also, hi Ray, appreciate you being here as always.
The song I was trying to think of, by the way, is "Getting Into You" by Reliant K. And it's just it's one of those songs that if you are a Christian, you're gonna sit there and listen to it, and it's gonna make you cry. Just because that's the way it goes. History Daddy for £2 says, as an agnostic, would God view agnosticism as bad?
Not to step on any toes, but probably. And the reason I say that is because God talks about those who believe but do not act, where he specifically refers to them as the lukewarm. Those who like he talks about the hot and the cold. There's those who understand God, there's those who follow God, and there's those who do not believe or follow God, the non-believers, and then there's those who know but don't do anything about it. So it's kind of up to the individual if an agnostic would be more like, oh, I theoretically believe in a kind of God, so they're more towards the cold side, or if they're like, yes, I believe in Jesus Christ, I just don't care.
Yeah, that would also that would be worse in my opinion.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, that would be worse because he talks about the hot and the cold, but the lukewarm I will spew out of my mouth. Can't be a good thing.
No.
Essentially, like, though he talks about that throughout the entire Bible, like those who know better don't act on it. I think we've talked about that on previous podcasts. So, like, those who are persecuted the worst in life are those who knew God directly, or like kings who were ordained by God and then turned their back from him. Yeah, it'd be closer to that line. I think which is kind of a belief that's pretty common across Christianity.
Yeah, I think it's very much dependent on where the agnosticism is coming from. If it's, if it's that you've never been exposed to it, then I think that that's a much more favorable position than those who have been exposed to it and still reject it, or those who have been exposed to it but are only believers in name. And at the same time, my personal interpretation of the way that the afterlife works is not that hell is necessarily a physical place of eternal suffering for all non-believers, but rather that after you die there is a possibility for purification, and that's the goal. Because I don't think, I just don't see. I don't know. I know that there are segments where hell is described as being, and this is, I think, the first episode of the show that we ever, maybe the second one, where we talk about hell at length. But the kind of the conclusion I came to as I was researching for that was there's not that hell is not that there is a place of eternal fire and torment, but that is not necessarily for us. That is for the Watchers, for example, from Enoch. That's what that is, and then we have the opportunity for purification and for redemption, because the goal is not to cause eternal suffering. It's to bring you closer, and if you reject it, then you might not end up in a place of eternal torment, but you likely will end up separate from God, and that's not an ideal place to be.
There's a verse somewhere in the New Testament, you're just gonna have to trust me, it's in there somewhere, where I think it's Hebrews, where it talks about Judas, and it talks about how Judas committed such an evil. Like, there's been people in history who have betrayed other people, right? Like, that's just a thing that happens. But Judas was evil not only because he betrayed a perfect person, but because he spent so long around divinity. He knew better than anyone what Jesus was about. Think about that. Judas had a better idea of who Jesus was than you or I ever will, this side of eternity, at least. So, like, Judas had no excuse for anything he went forward with. And the Bible talks about those who do have no excuse, those who know better. Think of the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, right? Short version of the parable, for those who don't know, there was a man named, there's a rich man who lived in a city, and there was a poor beggar named Lazarus who lived at the front gate of his house. And every day, the rich man would enter in and out of the gate of his house, and Lazarus the beggar would try to tell him about God. Lazarus would try to tell him about Jesus, try to tell him about God. And every day for years, the rich man ignored him. And then one night, whenever the rich man dies, it says he lifted up his eyes in hell, and he blames Abraham. He sees Abraham, and he blames Abraham and say, why wasn't I told? Mm-hmm. And Abraham says, every day for your entire life, you had the testimony of Lazarus, and yet you didn't follow God. And that is throughout the Bible viewed much more harshly than those who simply do not know. As a matter of fact, it is kind of a topic that's up in the air of what happens to people who flat out never know, like those from far off tribes. And I'm solid enough in the faith or in my own faith that I'm willing to accept. I just don't know what happens to a lot of people. Paul talked about God's grace is sufficient and beyond our understanding. I would, between you and me, I would never teach this in Sunday school. I never teach this as doctrine because this is just opinion. I wouldn't be surprised if God just sees the hearts of man and the capability or the concept of belief in them if they've never heard the testimony of the Word of God.
Yeah,
and that's enough for me. But I just think God's faith is beyond our understanding. So I would say that person's better off the person who was raised in church their whole life and decides that God's just not for them or whatever.
And I think
in my own opinion,
that goes to just kind of the idea here. We all have a moral inherent sense of right and wrong. And when you get to Christianity, and if you follow through Judaism up to Christ himself, what you get is that people know right and wrong, and Christ is kind of the perfect example of right and wrong. Throughout the Old Testament, you're having God telling the Jews, here's what's right, here's what's wrong. And in some cases, they succeed in following those rules, and in some cases, they fail. And that's why we have so many of these judges and these eventual things that happen to the Jewish people throughout their history. And then Christ comes along. Christ is perfect. He is as close as you can get to God and man in one thing. So I think that, for people who were never exposed, if you read the book, what I take away from it, and again, just like you, I would never teach this as doctrine, but what I take away from it is we're not dealing with a situation where they're going to get up to the pearly gates and St. Peter is going to go, sorry, well, I know you weren't aware, but you can't come in. You're going to hell. I don't think that's the situation we're dealing with. I think that they would be judged based on how they behaved, how they acted. Were they good people? And they would be told about God. Everything would be explained, but I don't think that they would be, judged for not knowing God. I think they would be judged for their inherent sense of right and wrong, and did they follow it?
Paul talked about that in Romans, because the church at Rome was asking what of the shores of, I forget what land they talked about. It was somewhere far away. They're like, what of the shores of them? Can't we go to prophesy? Essentially, Paul was saying why the mission in Rome is important. He says, do not lose sleep, essentially, over those. Yes, it is good to tell them of the love of Christ. Stay where you are. Be something to the effect of God's grace is sufficient. God's grace is enough. And I don't have to understand it. I'm going to trust the guy who made the universe, that when he says that, he means it. And I'm going to leave it well enough alone.
I think when you try to interpret it and try to make it into doctrine, that this is how you get into heaven, this is how you go to hell, you get some things like the Albigensian Crusade, you get the Northern Crusades, and just these moments in history where
what if we
Christians
kill them?
Yeah, exactly. Where Christians went way too far and made horrible mistakes and did bad things, all in the name of spreading a faith that they were told God's grace is sufficient. It is not their responsibility to go there. It's and just like us, I think a lot of people take the line, do not cast your pearls before the swine. And they take that and they're like, are you calling non-Christians swine? It's like, no, it's not about that. It's do not try and force people to believe. And the reason they use pearls and swine is because pearls have absolutely no value to pigs. Like, it's that simple. They're not saying you are pigs if you don't believe. They're saying it's not your responsibility to force it. They're not going to understand the value, so don't bother. Tell them, give them the good news. But if they don't accept it, it's no longer your responsibility. It's not, you don't need to force it. Be open, be accepting, be a resource, but it is not your job, and it's not good for you to go and try and force people to believe what you believe. Always be open, always be willing to explain and to accept, but do not force. And I think a lot of Christians have made that mistake.
That verse about pearls before the swine comes specifically talking about biblical doctrine. So it's essential, for those that don't know, it's saying, Jesus said, do not cast your pearls before the swine. Or in other words, if you go up to someone who's like, hey, who's Jesus? Don't be like, hey, can I explain to you the concept of predestination? Like, and people try that. Like, that sounds ridiculous, but I cannot tell you the number of religious leaders I've met who will argue with someone who's never heard the word of God about the concept of Pentecost. Like, stop.
Yeah,
that's not. So
that's not the place you start.
That is not the place you start. Yeah, like the purpose of what Jesus was saying was like, do not take this in the right order. That's kind of what I was talking about with Job.
Yeah,
like a bunch of people who have no concept of like, or true concept of Jesus or Christianity will look at Job and be like, wow, imagine how terrible to be a Christian. But for like me, that is an uplifting story. But yes, if you know nothing of Christianity, it's a terrifying story.
Yeah,
it's again the pearls before the swine.
Exactly. It's just understanding that. That kind of leads us into this next super chat, though, which is from Jack Manson for $20. Do you think the Crusades were justified? Why or why not? As a historian, I have many opinions. I don't know if you want to take the first swing at this one, but
you go for it. Buddy.
Yeah, so
I'm actually going to go to the bathroom real quick while you're doing that.
So here's the deal with the Crusades. They are taught poorly in school. A lot of people learn about them as the Pope decided that we just needed the Holy Land back, so we're going to call this huge army together and go in for it. That is not what happened in the situation that led up to 1095. So in 636 AD, just 4 years into Islam's existence, Muhammad's armies took Jerusalem at the Battle of Yarmouk in 636 AD. And they defeated the Byzantines. The Byzantines did not see this as a serious threat, and so it kind of caught them off guard. It was very much the same as America going into Vietnam, just running into something where you are not at all prepared for it. And so from 636 on, the Islamic conquests spread very, very slowly in the Middle East. The Byzantines, after losing Jerusalem, kind of figured it out. They were like, wait a second, we just lost the entirety of, what used to be the Seleucid Empire. So they realized that was a problem. They had lost the entirety of North Africa. The Europeans who were still at that time, I believe it may have even been Byzantine rule in some places, but the Europeans in Spain, the Christians in Spain, had been driven north. And in 732 AD, you get the Battle of Tours, which is actually in like central France. You have Islamic armies come up, Moorish armies, and they face off in this very climactic battle between the French and the Moors. The Franks and the Moors. And this is pre-Charlemagne. This is Charles Martel, who's Charlemagne's grandfather, I believe. And there's this huge climactic battle in 732. The Franks defeat the Moors, and that kind of stops the expansion. And then for the next 300 years, over in the East, in the Middle East, you have the Turks convert to Christianity. And between the Turks and the Arabs, the Byzantines were having a very, very, very difficult time securing their own territory. So after the Battle of Manzikert in the 1070s, when the Byzantines lose a whole bunch more territory, they finally reach out, and this is all after the schism, they finally reach out to the Catholic Church and say, hey, we need your help. If you do not help us out right now, we are going to lose all of Byzantium to the Muslims. And the church went, okay, the Catholics went, okay, we'll help. And so they went to everybody and they said, hey, guys, the Roman Empire really needs our help. The Byzantines need our help. Will you come with us? And the entirety of Europe just kind of goes, nah, I got my own problems. So he then sends another, letter around. He's like, hey, what if we help the Byzantines and take Jerusalem? And that gets everyone spurred into action. Let's go. And then you get 200 years of crusades. So the first crusade, justified, just in terms of socioeconomic and geopolitical reasons. what you're looking at here is a completely justified war between two powers, and it is not the initiation of aggression that it's often taught as. What it was is a response to 400 years of expansion by the Arabs and the Moors. So, yes, religion is kind of used as the reason to spur people into it at the time, but looking back at it through a historical lens, what you're dealing with is really not a religious war. It is a war between two very different cultural groups trying to maintain control, and, you know, the Crusade for Jerusalem was just a piece of trying to keep the Islamic world at bay. So it's as much a cultural issue and a geographical issue as it is a religious issue, in my opinion.
Well, I'll let you cover that. Very nice.
I don't know. I don't know if you have thoughts on the concept of just war from a religious standpoint that you want to talk about, but
here's the thing. I am not a fan of what's the word, government. No, more specifically, it talks throughout the Bible. Any institution of man, will eventually turn corrupt. It will eventually turn into itself, do wicked things, right? That include, and this is why, like, Catholic people disagree with me, but I don't care. That includes the Catholic Church. That includes, and I know, like, things can be ordained by God and have God as the figurehead, but if God's not the figurehead, that's where problems come. That's any world government. That's any what have you. So whenever you have a group of people who are pushing their own agenda and using God as a shield to do it, it's a very bad, awful place to be in. As a matter of fact, it talks about how on Judgment Day there's several people who come before the throne of God, saying, "Did they not prophesy and do things in His name?" And God says, "Depart from me, thy wicked servant. I never knew you." But you do not want God to say.
No, you do not. That's kind of like the only thing throughout the Bible that gets you removed from heaven, that gets you removed from eternal salvation, is blasphemy.
Non-belief and non-belief and blasphemy. Like, those are the big no-nos.
Yeah. Blasphemy is the only one that gets you, like, you're in the book of life. Blasphemy gets you pulled out of the book of life. That's what it says in Revelation, at least. That's what I'm going with. Like, there's a very direct quote in Revelation where it's, you know, essentially, if you change this book, you're going to hell.
Blotted out, yeah. Which I won't get into that right now, but anyway, so there's several people who tout the flag of God in order to further their own agenda, and things don't go well for them.
No, they do not.
I cannot think of a war that was not direct defense or ordainment by God, something like Old Testament, like, you know, Joshua and stuff. Cannot think of a war that's good. Now, God talks in the New Testament about how men should prepare for war because they're wickedness and evil, but that's not Him saying war's good.
Yeah.
That's Him saying don't die when they happen.
It's basically saying war is a reality, be prepared for it.
Pretty much, yeah. It's not like when the Bible talks about death, it's like, oh, so you're supposed to die? No, like, but people will take that, and they'll be like, oh, well, there's wars in the Bible, so here we go. Game time. You know, it's like Aidan said, it's a reality.
Yeah. All right. I think I'm in the right spot with super chats. It did just make a bunch of them disappear, a bunch of chats. But
there's a way to.
Yeah, them. it's YouTube does not do the best thing here. But Jaden Vitt for $5 says, first ever super chat. Stumbled into you as I was trying to get into my faith, and if it wasn't for you and a few good friends, I probably wouldn't. So thank you. We are glad to hear that. That is like the best thing to hear.
Yeah, that means a lot. Thank you.
Yeah. Problematic Farmer says her question wasn't answered, but I don't know which question it was. There's a lot of them in here. We're getting through them.
Ask it again by the time we're done. We'll see if it comes back around.
You have my number. Text it to me. That's one of my Discord mods. Sequitur Tenebris for $20, thank you, says, can you all explain evil done in the name of God? Is it misunderstood in Scripture or something else, i.e. Westboro Baptist types? So I think that kind of plays into the last few things we said. There is no evil in the name of God. There is only evil. And if you put it in the name of God, it compounds and gets more evil.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a double helping. You're doing one evil, but putting God's name on evil is also evil. So that's like a double order at once, which can't be a good thing.
I would put it this way: the folks over at Westboro Baptist Church are gonna be a lot lower on the heavenly totem pole than a gay Christian. Like, that's a gay Christian who loves everybody, much better in God's eyes than Westboro Baptist Church.
I remember, I think it's Paul. Sometimes I feel like I accidentally attribute everything to Paul, but he said a lot in the New Testament.
The most of the New Testament is Paul.
Most of the New Testament's Paul, yeah. So it's a pretty safe bet. Like, Paul. I think it's Romans. He's talking about the church was complaining about fellow people who are like wanting to fight or wanting to kill people in the name of God. And Paul essentially says, I fear the eternity that awaits those people.
Yeah, that's not a good thing to have.
Yeah.
One of the most important apostles say to you. Who is Paul's apostolic predecessor?
You mean like which apostle did essentially
ordained
was
him?
out? It was Thomas, right?
I think so, if I remember correctly. Yeah, just because Catholics and Orthodox both have the concept of apostolic succession. I think Lutherans and Anglicans might as well, but Protestant churches typically don't in the United States. So that's something that a lot of people kind of like get fuzzy on. But yeah, that's a...
Was him or...
I mean,
I don't think it specifically says who made him apostle. Someone brought him to the 12. I think it was Thomas. It could have been Matthew. I think it was Thomas. Anyway, I just did a study of Acts. I should know. But
he was like baptized by Ananias.
Yes, Ananias is the one who dunked him and the scales came off of his eyes. Are you talking about who like was his religious leader? Because that would be Ananias.
Yeah.
But it was I think Thomas who brought him to the 12, if you're talking about his joinment to the apostles.
Yeah. Is this the guy?
He was blind, and then God comes to Ananias and he's like, hey, you know that guy who's been killing Christians? I need you to go over to his house.
Yeah.
And Ananias is like, please don't do this. and God's like, you'll be fine. I'm God.
Yeah, please stop.
Please, God's like, really? You're good. God's literally talking to this man, and he's like, really? You're afraid? Okay.
Yeah.
But yet God does it to us, and we're also afraid. So I can't say anything.
All right. Diego Flores for PEN 20. I don't know what PEN is. But thank you. I don't know what currency that is. I'm like thinking about it. I'm like, what is this? Thoughts on how Japanese media seems to understand the Old and New Testament more than current day Christians? Many current day Christians. Also, any conspiracy you would like to go in detail after 411? Man, those are big ones. I don't know much about Japanese media, but from what I do know, it seems like their source material for when they do address Judeo-Christian stories is the Bible, and I think that is the answer to your question. Is I would guarantee that most Christians you will meet have never read the Bible cover to cover. I don't know that I could give you a percentage, but probably the vast majority of them have not done that. And of those who have done that, even fewer did it of their own volition rather than through Sunday school or church or something like that. So a lot of Christians, I think, just don't have the understanding that people who read the book have. So, for example, if you're writing Harry Potter fan fiction and you didn't read Harry Potter, you probably wouldn't come very close. Whereas if you did read it and you added a character and wrote a story about that character, you probably get it right. Sorry to use Harry Potter, but Isaiah yells at me every time I use Lord of the Rings.
Fair. I just appreciate diversity.
But yeah, that's how I look at it. Is I think it's honestly that they're just using the source material, whereas a lot of Christians today are basically going off of what they learned, off their internet or for hearing from their pastor, which isn't necessarily bad. It's just you probably shouldn't go out and preach unless you've read the book.
Agreed.
Yeah.
An idea to just start guessing, which again, as someone who's been in church his whole life, know plenty of people who have done just that. Start like, oh, well, I think blah, blah, blah. And they're just off the mark.
Yeah. It's okay to say, I don't know. If somebody asks you a question, that's acceptable.
I can tell you story after story of legit pastors even who I've come across who are just literally wrong.
Yep.
Just factually incorrect.
There's this one guy,
but they have,
Greg
like, whole
Locke, I keep
congregation-
hearing about, who is just very hateful. I've never actually seen his stuff, but just every quote I hear, I'm just like, dude, like, just what are you doing? When did this become the religion of hate?
Man, I don't understand. Like, I understand the initial American Protestantism, sort of. Like, I understand where, like, righteous fury came into it, because the OGs were, and I say OGs, I mean, like, colonial preachers, were talking about how Christians had let themselves evolve into wickedness.
Yeah.
Okay, that is, understand where there'd be a righteous hatred there. That's similar to Jesus driving the people out of the temple with a whip. Like, anger has its place. However, there's this awful idea with a lot of Christianity, specifically in, like, the Bible Belt, where all of it is full of anger and malice. And that is the worst approach you could possibly give to people who are just coming into the faith. Like, that, the only time Jesus used anger is when someone who was a part of religion or knew the scriptures was purposefully going against them. Not for people who just came into it or people who were questioning the learn. So those people tear me up.
Yeah, I had a personal experience with this. For those who don't know, when I was in college, I was a medieval studies major and a religious studies minor. So I was, at the time, as a senior, like, in class, in 400 level classes on, like, the cosmology of wisdom literature in the Bible. So I was in it. I was in depth. And one day, a group very much like the Westboro Baptist Church people with the God hates signs walking around out in front of the main building. And there were people trying to argue with them, but they were majority not Christians. So they weren't making the right arguments to dismiss these people. And then you had a couple Christians get involved. One person was a Catholic, and they just called him a papist and told him that they didn't care what he had to say. One person was Orthodox, one person was Jewish, and they had an excuse for every single group. I'm a Methodist, so when I got up there was really no excuse. It was, all right, I'm not Catholic, I'm not Orthodox, I'm not Jewish, I'm a Protestant, just like you guys. And it was just an hour-long argument on the street between me and these people where I'm like, by the end of it, I was mad at Christians. And I'm standing there as a Christian, like, arguing with these people. Man, you guys are annoying. Like, just so I get it, but those people are a greater threat to Christianity than just about anyone else, because they make it seem like this hateful ideology, and in reality, they should just shut up.
You know what? Those people are seen a lot throughout the Bible too, and when I've been doing my study of Acts, they come up a lot. I'm once again asking, because I know we're going over the normal time we do. Are you good to go a bit longer?
I'm good to go as long as you want to go.
Cool.
I might have to pee again, but
that's fine. Me too. In the book of Acts, which for those who don't know, Acts is the early days of the Christian church.
Acts of the Apostles.
The Acts of the Apostles, yeah. So you've got the Gospels, which is the life of Jesus, and then Acts. So it's what the first Christians do, beginning the church immediately after Jesus. And shortly after, chapter 6, if I remember correctly, or 7, I just did study on this. Chapter 5. In Acts chapter 5, there are two people named Ananias and Sapphira. So when I say the church is small, I mean the entirety of Christianity at this point is like a few hundred people. Like that's it. So like the church is in a very sensitive period. Imagine, because at the time the Roman government was hunting down Christians. Imagine if Roman soldiers found 300 meeting together at once. That would literally be the end of Christianity for all of human history, right? So it cannot be at a more sensitive point. And during this, two members of the church named Ananias and Sapphira begin to hide tithe money from them. So for those that don't know, the reason people tithe is because Christian work needs to continue. Money is a thing that exists. You need money to like travel or build or what have you. So the initial church is doing it so they can afford to send missionaries out, which eventually becomes like Paul and Peter and all of them. So Ananias and Sapphira start to hide that money to themselves. They're told to give a portion of it back, and they don't. So when Peter confronts them, he goes to Ananias first, and he says, "Where's the money?" And Ananias is like, "I'm not hiding it." Peter goes, "You're dead," and he falls over dead immediately. Then Sapphira shows up, and Sapphira was Ananias' wife.
Mm-hmm.
So he goes to Sapphira. He's like, "Where's?" I don't want to misquote this. Let me get it exactly. It says, "Is it not thine own? And after it was sold, was it not thine own power?" This is what Peter's saying to Ananias. It says, "Thou hast not lied unto men, but unto God."
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is sensitive time for the church, and he's lying to God. It says, "And Ananias, hearing these words, fell down and gave up the ghost. And great fear came on all them that heard these things." It says, "And the young men arose, wound him up, and carried him out, and buried him. It was about the space of 3 hours after. And his wife, not knowing what was done, came in." So she's walking into the church now, does not know that her husband's dead. It says, "And Peter answered unto her, Tell me whether ye sold the land for so much." It's more specifically than just hiding money. They were supposed to sell one of the church members' land to give the money to the church, and they kept the money. So, or they lied about how much it sold for. But then Peter says, "You sold the land for how much?" And she said, "Yea, for so much." So she's like, "Yeah, the amount we gave, that's how much we sold it for." Then Peter said unto her, "How is it that ye have agreed together to tempt the Spirit of the Lord? Behold, the feet of them which have buried thy husband are at the door, and shall carry thee out." Then fell she down straightway at his feet, and yielded up the ghost.
Wow.
The young men came in and found her dead, and carried her forth, burying her by her husband. Oh.
But I think it's important to talk about what the sin there is.
Correct.
It was the lie.
Correct. It was the lie. So if this was, and to clarify, if this was someone who didn't know God, or even if someone who did know God, the sin is not like, oh, they were not being completely truthful about how much money they have. It's the fact that Ananias and Sapphira were the founders of the church. They had to be more about it, because at such a crucial time, if anything goes wrong, the whole church falls apart. What if this new religion just got the testimony, "Oh, that's the church whose that new religion starting up is the one whose members have been stealing money from landowners," right? Destroys Christianity for all of history. At such a sensitive time, you cannot have people with a bad testimony. And above all else, they knew better. They knew the position and the situation that they had. So whenever they are threatening the entire future of Christianity, there's no suffering, there's no penance. It's just you're out of the equation.
And I think
I talk.
Yeah, good.
I talk about a lot to my class. If, as a Christian, again, this doesn't apply to people who don't know or follow God. As a Christian, if you can either be in God's will or in the way of God's will. If you're in the way, you will promptly be removed from the will of God, and sometimes it can be good, or sometimes fall down. I do like the message of Peter being like, "Well, the men who carried your husband are at the door, and you're going out."
Yeah.
Like that, no time to mess around.
And I think that you really need to understand, again, for people who are new to understanding Christianity, or maybe even just have not heard this before. It's what's going on with cases like this is not that these people are just themselves a problem, like you said. It's that they are supposed to be the leaders and everything. So if they go astray, everyone in their church is also going astray. So they're not just they are not only the keepers of their own souls, they are the keepers of the souls of an entire community. So if they lead those people astray, they are harming others actively. So by lying in such a manner, when you're in charge, when you've been given charge of a church, that's really bad. Like, for example, one person that, I'm not sure I believe in the idea of eternal hellfire for sinners, but one person who I believe still is probably working his way back out of the pit is Gregory VII, the Pope who issued the Dictatus Papae that argued that the Catholic Pope is the supreme ruler of the entire world, ordained by God for that. I think that probably lost him some points. To answer the other half of the question, also, any conspiracy you would like to go in detail after 411? Yes. and it's something that might get me killed. So I might not do it.
That's the best kind.
You know, Bohemian Grove, Bohemian Club.
Bro, if you get assassinated for Bohemian Grove, I will name my child after you.
Well, thank you. But yeah, I've looked at that and I'm like, I'd love to figure out what's going on here. But yeah,
I haven't killed Alex Jones yet, so you'll be
exactly.
just pretend to be crazy at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I might not have to pretend at this point. They might be like, this guy believes in the Wendigo. We don't need to worry about him. Jack Manson for $5. Do you think? Oh, okay, it was just a re-upping that question. Yes, I do. The first few, the rest were a little bit like, okay, you guys are done. You failed. Let's see. Space Panda for $2 says, yes, Ray, Target. We do have a brand. We have a brand ambassadorship with Target. If you go to the link in our description and buy stuff, we will make a small amount of money. And what I'm wearing is from Target. It's a very, very comfortable shirt by Goodfellow & Co. Space Panda for $2 said, have you had supernatural experiences with God? I personally would not say I've ever had a supernatural experience that I would chalk up to speaking directly with God. I have had some weird experiences, but nothing on that level.
I wouldn't call it. It's a lot for a person to be like, oh yeah, God talked to me, right? But I do believe God speaks in a still small voice. Mm-hmm. Or like through a spiritual life. I remember when I was really close with my grandfather when he died. I was 10 years old, and his death really tore me up. Then the night he died, I had a dream where I talked to him, mm-hmm. and I asked him questions that I don't think at 10 years old my brain would have, like, you know, obviously dreams you can talk to your subconscious or whatever. It's enough faith for me, the conversation we had, that it wasn't just a, like, you know, my brain overlapping the chemicals to feel like I felt like it was a supernatural experience. That's not even to say that I spoke to him necessarily, because I believe to be absent with the body is to be present with the Lord. As a child, I feel like situations like that were divine in order to give me a better understanding or a better faithfulness. Not to say that God directly came down and talked to me, or the spirit of my grandfather shot out of heaven into, you know, whatever. But it is enough to, like, help my faith. I've had situations similar to that. I remember one night, this sounds really weird. I'm not saying this to say that I am like a what's the word? Not prophet? Psychic. Medium? Not a prophet, not a medium. I don't believe in any of those in the modern age. I don't believe that post-Christ there's any, like, true prophets or anything like that. I think it was just a weird occurrence that some people chalk up to supernatural. I don't necessarily. I had a dream that my neighbor was going to die, and then the next day he did. That was weird, because it was like, it was someone I hadn't. It's someone I didn't. It turns out they were sick. I didn't know they were sick. Hadn't spoken to him in years. Then I just walked in. I was like 12, and I walked into my room. And was like, I had a dream that so and so died, and my parents were like, "Huh." An hour later, they're like, something happened.
So other Aidan has told a story on our show before where I believe it was his grandmother. He just woke up one night and went and asked his parents, like, how she was doing or something, or some. I can't remember the story. You know, I'll ask him to tell it next time he's on. But basically, like, he just knew when she died. And for me, my grandfather died in December. And I remember, you know, we knew that he was declining pretty fast, but I remember on a few occasions saying to my cousins, saying to my mom, he's waiting for Christmas. He's going to go on Christmas. And I got this tattoo that I have, actually. I got in November, around Thanksgiving, week of Thanksgiving. It means I am not afraid. And I got it, you know, because I knew he was dying. And I just remember kind of like just being sure of that. Like, it wasn't a lot of people in my family were like, you know, maybe. And I was just positive, 100%. I was like, he is going to die. He is waiting for us to all be together for Christmas. Sure enough, we finished dinner on Christmas Day. And immediately after everybody finished and cleaned up, we all got the call. We were all at my aunt's place. One of my older cousins was the one who delivered the news, because his kids, my mom and her siblings were all with him, and then the rest of the family was over at our aunt's house a mile away, and it was just kind of like when it happened, I was kind of at peace with it because I knew it was happening, and that's probably the closest I've ever come. But yeah, it's sometimes stuff just happens where like and you can't explain why. It's just you're positive of it, and I think those kinds of things are, in a way, God speaking to you, but not through words in a way that you would necessarily recognize in the moment.
Yeah. I'm very cautious of anyone who says God directly speaks to them, because biblically that's not how it works. But I do believe that God speaks through the Spirit. He speaks through a small voice. That's the whole purpose of the Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm. We have a piece of God in us as believers that communicates right from wrong and all that. So it's one of those things that I can't really like give you a direct experience to be like, oh yeah, this is the time God spoke to me. But I feel throughout my life He speaks to me in different ways. Yeah. Without being a weird zealot.
Exactly. Yeah, there's the hints here and there. You're not experiencing I don't like a voice in your head. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't hear voices. Call it a sixth sense, if you will.
Yeah. If you do hear voices, it might be schizophrenia.
To maybe get that checked out.
Yeah. No Dancing Palm Trees for $7 Canadian says, thank you for this episode on Job and for all of your related tangents. As a Taoist, I appreciate your knowledge that you share with us. Well, thank you. I haven't met many Taoists in my life. But I appreciate the ideology. We learned about it in college. Greg Torres for $5 says, what is y'all's favorite game?
Video game?
Yeah. I assume video game.
I've been playing Hell Let Loose a lot lately because I love World War II games. That's been my favorite game right now.
I want to try that.
Like my favorite. It's so good, man. It's so good. Like, you want to talk about realism, World War II, especially whenever you start playing as an officer, calling in artillery, designating tanks and soldiers. Oh, it's so fun. Anyway, that's my favorite game right now. My favorite game of all time is... I always have good answers for this whenever I'm not asked them. I always said the Batman Arkham games because I grew up on them, and they were like... Oh, the new Resident Evil games are my favorite by far. So like Resident Evil 7, Resident Evil 8, RE2 remake, those are my favorite. I'm so stoked for the RE4 remake. So yeah.
I think my favorite of all time would be Mount and Blade Bannerlord. That's just probably the one that I think if I look at Steam, I've probably logged 5,000 hours on it. A lot of those have been just from it sitting idle or something, but like
sure,
enough are not from that. But yeah, I think that one, and also up there, Age of Empires 2. That's the first video game I ever really played. My dad and I played it all the time. I finally beat him for the first time in my life when I was 20.
Wow.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
It took me, he introduced me to that game when I was 3. It took me 17 years to beat him. But I did it. Dad. Let's see, what else do we have in here? Christian Castro for 20 asked, hey guys, love your content. Hope you're having a good day. I was born and raised as a Mormon, and I know that my religion is usually a joke, but I still believe to be a faithful son of God. Honestly, that's all that matters about it. Mormonism definitely does get a lot of flack. I have my issues with certain aspects of it, but at the same time, as long as you're being a good person, as long as you're trying to be Christ-like, that's what's charged to you as a Christian. My main issue with it is the denial of the Trinity. But as long as you're trying to be a good person, that's the goal,
I like those subtle jabs you got in there.
It wasn't really a jab. It's just that's why I don't consider it Christian. Is that Christianity acknowledges the Trinity? So when I say Mormons aren't Christian, it's not me saying like you're a bad person. It's me saying like there is a significant difference in ideology between these two faiths.
People are calling me based. I'm still scrolling through looking for questions. People are calling me based, and I don't know what I did to deserve it, but thank you.
Might have been the government comment.
Oh, yeah, that's probably what it was. I don't like government. Yeah, okay.
Surfing Cowboy for 5 says, I appreciate that you're brothers in Christ. It makes mysterious folklore discussions grounded and comfy rather than devolving into schizo posting. That's fair.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. Let's see. Hammond for $2 just says when Debussy. So
I saw that. I was hoping you'd ignore it.
it was a super chat. We have rules on this channel.
Gussie was bad enough.
Yeah.
Pussy makes me want to kill myself.
If it makes you feel any better, Thornberry is Thornbussy. Like,
Let's keep reading.
Yeah. Echelon Lazarus for 20 says, I just got here in more ways than one. I couldn't think of a question, but keep up the good work. You guys are awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that. If it makes you feel any better, Lanago Miscellaneous says no at Hammond.
What, the Windabussy thing?
Yeah.
Thank you for that, for defending my honor somewhat.
In the future, I will not acknowledge.
I hate that you came up with that. It drives me crazy. No, you can acknowledge it because it's your thing. But, like, I got so many Windagussy comments.
Did you actually?
Yes, back whenever that was like.
They might not have been my fault.
Yeah, but then I go over to TikTok and you're just like, oh, Windagussy.
No, I said Wendussy.
That's what I meant. Windagussy, whatever. Whatever you did.
It was not intentional. I will say that much.
Like I was just scrolling through my comments like these heathens. I can't stand them. Then I go over to my friend and podcast host, and he's like, "Oh, Windagussy."
For a while, I did fight it. I finally broke in February and just went with the meme.
Yeah, well, that's what they got bad. So
yeah,
thank you.
That was my bad. I've seen people that don't even follow me making videos about the Wendussy now, so I have lost control. Do you ever think God too looks down at his creations?
Stop.
I love that that's a quote from Spy Kids. I'm sure it's from something else, but just like the Steve Buscemi saying, "Do you think God too lives in fear of what he's created?" is just like a fever dream moment from childhood. Aidan Paladin for 10 says, on Judas, God required him to betray Christ, so is Judas saved for going through with God's plan? That's a solid question, actually.
Say that again?
God needed Judas to betray Christ for Christ's sacrifice to occur.
Oh, the whole Judas's destiny
yeah
thing. Covered this on the Bible Theory Iceberg. So my interpretation of it goes back to the same argument that God saw throughout history. For example, it talks about, I'm taking it away from Judas so that I can then relate it back to Judas. It talks about in the Old Testament, specifically in the book of Isaiah, that Jesus, the Son of Man, the Christ, whenever he comes to earth, that he will never break a bone in his body. One of the ways that people are killed during a crucifixion is their leg is broken. For those that don't know, the reason a crucifixion's fatal is because you suffocate.
Yeah.
It's a very excruciating death. You suffocate because your arms are up like this, and all your weight's hanging like on your hands, and you're stretched, so you can only do short breaths. And the only way you can get a breath is if you stand up by pushing off your legs so that you can breathe and then set back down. So the way that they speed up executions is they break your leg so that when you can't push up, so you suffocate quicker. Horrific death. So it says in the book of Isaiah that Jesus would never break a bone, right? Then we get to the crucifixion, and it's like, oh, his bone should be broken. But it says that whenever the soldier was breaking the bone of the two other men on the cross, he comes to Jesus, and it seems that Jesus was already dead, so he didn't break his bone. Also says that one of the prophecies is that he will be stabbed in his side. So the soldier at the bottom of the cross, checking to see if he's dead, stabs Jesus in the side with a spear, and it says blood and water pours out. So did that soldier have a destiny or a faith? No, I wouldn't say so. The guy was just doing his job, and he's like, oh, this one's dead, let me check, and he stabs him. It's not like that soldier was, I mean, you could say in a theoretical sense, but it's not like his purpose was predestined to carry out that. It's just that God, who can see all of time, gave knowledge to people in the past to predict it so that his word could further be glorified and that proof of God could further stand. Because there's no way that you could say the prophet Isaiah knew that Jesus Christ would not have his leg broken in some fluke of crucifixion.
I mean,
it's again another proof.
Yeah, crucifixion wasn't even a common punishment at Isaiah's time.
Correct, yeah. Like, he talked about how the Son of Man would be hung on a tree, and people were like, okay, whatever that means.
He was quite literally hung on
but
wood.
He was quite literally hung on a tree, yeah. Like, there's so that, and like, you can get into the prophecies. There's so many of those. But it's not like the people who set those up were like, oh, I'm carrying out my destiny. It's just that God had knowledge of the future, so he gave it to men in the past. Judas is one of those. It talks about how a spirit came into Judas, or like wickedness essentially came over him, and he was following his own evil. He regretted it afterwards, but in the time he was following his own wicked deceit. He was like, I don't want to be around this Jesus guy, and they'll give me some money to betray him. He betrays God. That isn't something that God bestowed on him or put like a cap over him that he was supposed to do. That was something that was going to happen. So God gave the knowledge to Isaiah, just as he gave the knowledge being stabbed in the side, that he would be betrayed by someone close to him. It's not like Isaiah writing it sealed Judas's destiny. It's God just saw everything before it happened, which leads to another level, because Peter talked about after Jesus died, he was like, it was even said that the Son of Man would betray him. See, because Peter knew the scripture. He understood it. Judas was next to it his whole life. Imagine Judas. He's standing next to Christ. He knows that this guy's been written about by the prophet Isaiah and everyone who came before him. And he may have read that someone will rise up and betray him, but he was so narrow-minded or so pointed away from the scripture that he didn't think anything of it when he betrayed him.
Yeah.
Think about that. You're reading about a guy who's like, he will be betrayed before he dies and rises again, and you're betraying him, and that just does not click the wires in your brain. Whereas with Peter, he mentioned it. He was like, it said he would be betrayed, and sure enough, he was betrayed. So that gives you an idea of Judas' state of mind. He wasn't even conscious of it. So it's not like Judas was possessed by the Holy Spirit or something. He acted in his own will. God just gave knowledge of it to people in the past.
Agreed. And also got to remember that a big, through point of all of this is that the devil exists and is temptation constantly. So even if you are a righteous person, the devil might come to you and suggest things to you, and it might be that it could be as blatant as, someone appearing to you and saying, do this thing, or it could just be those intrusive thoughts, And
like, people get discouraged. A lot of the times, this is especially like a thing with like some Pentecostal, not Pentecostal, some like, it's the word I'm looking for, Bible Belt.
Evangelical?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, especially in like a lot of evangelical religion, Christianity, like, they'll say that like thoughts or concepts are wrong, but that's not how it is. Like, temptation's not a sin. Dwelling on temptation is a sin. For example, if a guy like sees a woman and thinks she's pretty, that's not a sin. It's not a sin to just be like, I am man, you are woman, cute. It is, however, a sin to continuously think on it. And it says if a man ponders on a woman's figure, that he's committed adultery with her in his heart. To have wicked and immoral thoughts about a woman, that's a sin. It's not a sin to think a girl's pretty.
Yeah, exactly.
The same can apply to like disbelief. It's not a sin to be like, oh, well, what did God mean by this? As a Christian, especially growing up in church, I had points where I was like, I wonder if God's real. I wonder if this is what God. And every time I searched the scriptures, God held up to the criticism I had, or the questions I had more specifically. But like, it's not a sin to think wrong. I mean, we just talked about Job, who wanted to commit suicide.
Yep. Not a sin.
Not a sin.
Actually, just a completely understandable thought during the circumstances. Yeah.
Being human. Jesus was tempted. The devil dragged Jesus into the wilderness for 40 days and tried to convince him to give up his empire or to show his power and all this other stuff. And it says Jesus was tempted. So if that guy can, who are we to be like, oh, I shouldn't have a bad thought? Like,
yeah, it's just ridiculous.
You're not better than God. Yeah,
like, you're gonna have a bad thought. It's gonna happen.
Right. Human. That's how it works.
Bullwhip Bobby Love, which is one hell of a name, let me just say.
That's a great name.
For $4.20, says, do y'all see marijuana on the same level as wine? I assume you mean in terms of like the sin of drunkenness, in which case I think that the sin really is inebriation, and excessive inebriation. I don't think God's up there looking at you for smoking a joint to deal with your anxiety and deciding that you're going to hell.
I, unless it's like a close friend who wants my counseling, I do not comment on anything that could be a personal step. Right? Like what I will comment on is things that bring other people down. You know, thievery. I will openly say, fellas, it's bad to make a woman uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I'll openly say, ladies, it's bad to manipulate men. You know, like, even though those are personal decisions you're making, there's something that affects someone else.
Yeah.
That's where, like, the call out to sin. But if it's something that, like, I will say it's definitely bad to force any, like, I don't partake in any substances out of personal conviction. I'm not going to expect everyone to hold to that same standard. Because that's a personal standard. It doesn't hurt anyone else. Now, if you're hurting someone else with it, stop. Aside from that, like, read the scriptures and come to your own determination of it.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, a lot of it depends on why you're doing it as well. You know, drinking wine for the Eucharist is very different than drinking wine because you're watching, you know, New Girl, and it's just you decided to drink wine. Like, so, you know, if you're using, like, my opinion on it would be, like, if you're using marijuana because it's a good sleep aid or something like that, and you have insomnia brought on by something, like, that's, you know, for me, I use CBD to fight my my insomnia that I have from my anxiety disorder. So I don't think that God's up there looking at me, you know, popping a CBD gummy and going, I think it's, you know, if I were to sit there and, you know, smoke 10 joints, eat an edible, and, you know, drink some weed infused coffee, I think at that point God would be like, hey, my guy, like.
It does talk about dulling your mind. Yeah. It talks about how it's bad. Again, these are stuff for as a believer, as a Christian. It's bad to, like, numb yourself to the world, to not be able to be an active participant. It's like in the spirit of slothfulness isn't good. It's essentially along the same line of being lazy. It also talks about how it's not good to owe any debts or debtors to people or things. So if you have an addiction to something and that's what controls you, that in itself is a departure from what God wants. Because, you know, you're supposed to be your own free agent, not bend to the will of something, that a substance you can't get over.
Exactly.
And again, that's not a sin that hurts someone else. It's sinful or wrong because it hurts you, the person.
Yeah, exactly my opinion on the subject. What else do we have? We have from Echelon Lazarus again for 5. Just a thought of a question. I was wondering where I can listen to Wendigoon's old Patreon podcast.
So, the old Patreon podcast is currently dead with Patreon. I don't want to, like, set up a site or something just for it. I will probably be starting a different podcast in a similar vein soon-ish, and once that's done, I'll figure out what I want to do with it. All the old episodes are still saved. I'll go somewhere eventually, but for now I'm focusing on future direction. Then after that's done, I'll see if I can, like, offload the old ones or something. We'll see.
If you want to put them on a website, I have a template I can give you that you can just throw them on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Then we may do that.
Yeah.
You'll be the first to know if you follow me on Twitter and stuff. So
I can help you. The website design is what I do. So what was I looking for? Right, there we go. Scrolling back down. Milena for 499 says it makes me happy that there's Christian creators out there like you two. Keep it up, champs. Also, Isaiah is really hot.
I'm sure my girlfriend hopefully would agree with you. But that's
based on her Twitter, I would say probably.
Hopefully, yeah.
I do follow her on Twitter. She's very, very devoted girlfriend.
Yes, I'm very happy to be with her.
Let's see. Eric for $2 says, great work, guys. Loving the channels and content. Thank you, Eric. Somebody said the Crusades is a long story, and I agree with that take. There is a great book that I have that I will find, and I will post it somewhere about the Crusades, and just a very good. It's one of those books that, like, yeah, it's nonfiction, but it reads like a novel, so it's just a really great one. What else do we got here? Scrolling down. Damn, 260 watching, 230 likes. What a ratio. We're actually at 327 watching and 320 likes right now. So I appreciate you guys. You are
fantastic.
Yeah, you are the best. Gun Day for $5 asks, what's your favorite handgun and rifle?
Not show and tell.
I'm fine with it.
Get to another question while I'm grabbing these.
Okay. I mean, I can give my answer. I have a Ruger AR-556 and I love it. But I've also always wanted a Springfield 1903. I just want one really bad. I can't really explain why, other than that I just love them. I love bolt action rifles. I think they're a lot of fun to shoot. As far as handguns go, I would love to have a 1911 one day, but I went with a 40 cal Smith & Wesson M&P Shield 2.0. It's pretty heavy and kind of bulky, not a good concealed carry, but as far as a self-defense weapon goes, it's awesome. Great magazine capacity and really good weight to help with the recoil. Let's see. Oh boy, we skipped ahead a little bit. While he handles his business over there. If Lucifer asked God to be forgiven with sincerity, do you think he would be forgiven, or has he done too much evil to be forgiven? That's a really good question.
What I missed.
Just the next question is a great one, but if you're prepared for your answer to the favorite handgun rifle question,
I'll go ahead and do that. We're just having fun at this point.
I said my 1903 and or I said I want a 1903 and I would also love my I love my Smith & Wesson.
Springfield 1903?
Yeah, I just want one.
They're fun. I have one. They are very fun.
It's just I just love bolt action rifles.
They're fun. I want a infield really bad. I'm looking for one right now.
I saw a replica in a gun shop in New York, and it was a $500 Enfield, and I was like,
and those are nice. Anyway, so handgun. I don't do a lot of competition shooting, but when I do, this is like the smoothest firing. Focused a CZ75. This is specifically the Shadow 2, so it's like the thin grip one. This is the most accurate handgun I've ever shot. Not only in shot for shot, but like the recoil is invisible. It's fantastic. It's a 21 round magazine. Like, it's absurd.
Is it a 9mm?
I like this thing a lot. Yeah, it's 9mm. With these extensions, it's actually 23. So it's fun. It's a good target pistol.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite single rifle, go-to of AR is a Knight's Armament SR-15 with a variable. This is like Appalachia stand gun, a 16-inch variable optic.
Oh my god!
And it's a Knight's, so yeah.
Sitting here with my much cheaper Ruger.
And my favorite model of rifle, however, is the FAL.
Oh my god, you have an FAL.
I've got
I am
several.
Jealous.
Because a few years ago, my dad and I got into building them,
Uh-huh.
and we still do. So I'll buy the parts kits cheap, and then like get receivers imported, and my dad and I will build them out. So this was
That's
the
so
first
cool.
one we built. It's a South American FAL. But yeah, like the design is fantastic. I still think it's the best 308 semi-automatic design ever. And it's like you can excellently tune the gas on it to where it's a smooth shooter. And they're accurate, and I like them a lot. So, yeah.
Damn, I'm jealous of your stash.
Thank you.
I'm also jealous of the stash. I wish I could grow facial hair. Before the show, I was sitting in my bathroom, like, do I shave or do I keep this mess of scraggly hair on my face? But yeah,
Did we?
What?
Go ahead. I was gonna say, did we skip through a lot of the phonos?
A lot of the
that one.
No, that's.
Of the super chats? Oh, okay.
I don't think so. I mean, not any that I saw on my screen.
Okay.
Let's see. If Lucifer asked God to be forgiven with sincerity, do you think he would be forgiven, or has he done too much evil to be forgiven? I think Lucifer's fate is kind of already sealed.
I think is being. That to me is almost the same question as what if there's like multiple like generations of humanity that exist, like one of those unknowables. I feel like Lucifer's pretty determined, given that he not only led the rebellion against God, but led humanity itself to plunge into eternal damnation.
Are we
separation from God?
Are we in agreement that the Satan in Revelation is Lucifer, same person? Yeah, so I mean, if you read Revelation, one of the only things about Revelation that is very, very explicit is that Lucifer and the rebellious angels get cast into eternity. Basically, everything else is up for interpretation, which is why it's such a hard book to talk about. But you get a pretty explicit thing that says, God is going to win, and everybody's going to get cast into eternity who fought against him, all the angels. So I mean, and the question is, like, where are we in that timeline with Revelation? It was, again, I spent an entire course on this in college and still don't totally understand it, but it was basically like there's a few possibilities. One is that all of the stuff in Revelation has yet to occur, that it's in the future. There's one belief that it already occurred, and then there's the more kind of the general consensus one is that we are living in it, and the things that are written about in Revelation are coming to pass, but that the timeline is totally unknowable, and we could get, a number of things happen and then nothing else happens that's supposed to happen for several hundred years. And, that's why when you read Revelation and you have all these people who are coming out and, having these doomsday prophecies and whatnot, like, it's just because a series of things that happen in Revelation happen or seem like they happen does not mean that we're looking at the end of the world in, next month. So don't take doomsday prophecies to heart. They're not accurate ever. You look disgruntled.
No, I'm literally just.
Oh, you're just reading.
Chat,
is this just your reading face?
I yeah, just a general upsetness now.
Should I feel obligated? Jackman said, "Should I feel obligated to try and convert my pagan friend?" My opinion on that would be that you should make it clear that you are happy to talk to them about Christianity at any time, but that's about where it should stop. You do not want to force it onto them. You want to let them know that you're there, that you're a resource, but if it is their choice not to, then, it's not something where you should end the friendship. It's not something where you should push them until they end the friendship. Be a resource. Tell them you're happy to spread the word, but you don't want to force it. And you don't even need to phrase it like a conversion deal. Just if it's just, I know you're pagan, just so you know. I'd love to talk about faith and religion if you ever want to have a discussion. You can ask me questions. I'm just here. That is the best way to approach that kind of thing, in my opinion. Is that just a nod of agreement? Yeah, I was just waiting if you had anything to add.
No. Yeah, you're right. I don't know why I thought that I was like, okay, next question. In my experience, seeing friends can be tricky, because there's a bond there, and you don't want to jeopardize it in any way. But at the same time, if you know about eternal salvation and the love of Christ, you would want to share that with a friend. In my experience, I've never rushed a friend with it. Never been like, hey, let me tell you about blah blah blah, because that doesn't work in my experience, at least most scenarios. Obviously there's some where it would, and that's up to you. Some people are just desperate for something, and if you give them that, it'll go a long way. But in my experience, all my friends know I'm a Christian. I try to live a lifestyle that's conducive of that. At least I'm not perfect by any means, but at least to where it's known. And most often my friends who are lost have come to me. And I've had the privilege of leading several of my friends to God, just from me being a resource, that whenever something happens, they're just like, why do you believe the things you do, or how do you know this? And from there, it's not like I'm forcing myself on them. I have the opportunity to tell a friend about something that means a lot to me. And whenever they trust in that, that's a blessing that words can't into.
Yeah, I very recently had a real life experience of this with one of my friends who I've known since I was 7, where we were just sitting talking about current events and everything, and he made some comments about religion and Christianity and all of that, and I just kind of sat there and asked him why he thinks those things, and what are his questions for me as a Christian, about why I believe what I believe. And for what I did was I sat there, I explained it, and when, at a certain point, it just became clear that he was just not responding to it. either because he wasn't prepared to really have the conversation with himself, or just because he, didn't want to argue about it or whatever. And I just kind of let it go. I was like, if you ever want to talk about it, feel free to hit me up. I'm happy to talk, but it's your choice to believe what you believe. And I think if I had pushed the issue, it probably would have led to us being unhappy with each other. So, preserving that friendship and eventually being a resource should that person choose is the best way to go about it. It is always better to preserve a friendship than to force one to end, because at the end of the day, you have an entire life ahead of you where that person may need you, and they may come to you and say, hey, I'm really struggling with this. Can you help me? And if you're not there, who's going to be?
Yeah, you're right. Like, a lot of people, I remember my dad led my neighbor to Christ. My neighbor had no interest in it his entire life, but he would just watch our family go to church every Sunday morning. Then on that guy's deathbed, he was an older guy. On that guy's deathbed, he asked for my dad to come over. All he said was, I watched you all every Sunday. You were there and out of it. I want to know what you've got. Like that. A testimony is more of a witnessing tool than anything else. You can't help anyone if you've offended them. So never offend someone, never come on too strong. But a testimony is especially with friends, a testimony is the biggest soul saver.
Totally agree. Just a mild vibe shift here. Noah Isaac for $2 asks, M1 Garand or SKS?
M1 Grand.
I'm also on the Grand train.
I wouldn't want to go to war with either. Probably,
yeah.
But I like the Grand more.
If I got to pick between the two, I'm going Grand.
Also, I don't know, I think some of the super chats went away. I found one that I think you might have skipped over, unless I was gone when you asked. It's, I'm a writer who's trying to work with Lucifer. Did you see that one?
I did not see that one. That might be one of the ones that disappeared when I had my glitch.
Okay. It says, hi, I'm a writer who's trying to work with Lucifer and humanize him to some extent. How could I make an interesting interpretation that religious folk could get behind or be satisfied with?
That's a hard one to answer.
I will say the majority, like, as a writer and also a Christian, I would almost never touch direct divinity like that.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying it's wrong, or I'm saying, like, oh, you shouldn't do it. Like, do whatever you want, of course. Whatever you feel is okay. I'm just saying that you may... Even if you do a perfect job representing it, there will probably be Christians who are like, I still don't like the concept that it was even touched upon.
Yeah.
Now, I wouldn't care. I watch shows like Supernatural.
Yeah.
I'm not, it's different if I write about it or, just witness it. So I don't see necessarily things wrong with it, but it's a hard line to walk.
I'll tell you what, I did write a short story for a class in college that deals with that exact subject. If you email me, it's my email is in the one of the links in the bio or in the description. It's the aidanmattis.card.co. My email is in there, both my Lore Lodge and my my personal business. So feel free to shoot that over, and I will happily send you a copy of that. That's something I wrote while I was in religious studies courses, and I was trying to be respectful to it and all of that. But I agree with Isaiah. You're never gonna write a depiction of the devil that paints him in a good light and have Christians be okay with it wholesale. You'll probably get a lot of Christians who are fine, but there will be people who are pissed at you, and just general advice, you're always going to piss somebody off no matter what you do. If you do anything, it will annoy somebody. So don't use am I going to piss people off as your compass for should I do something. Use are people going to be rightfully pissed off?
I would say this. Again, I'm not like some holy roller evangelist type, but the one depiction that I get tired of seeing over and over of Lucifer is like the sad boy Lucifer, like, oh, I just wanted to be free or whatever, and like I'm a poor innocent. I hate that so much.
I think Supernatural actually did a pretty good job of making Lucifer a relatable character, but was still the bad guy. I don't necessarily
Yes.
mean they did a good job about like accurately portraying Christian eschatology,
Right.
but in terms of making Lucifer into a workable character who was that you could relate to while also still making him very much the bad guy, I think they did a solid job with that. But
My biggest problem with Supernatural, and I say this as someone who watched 10 seasons of it and enjoyed it.
yeah,
The only like thing that I continuously had a problem with that bothered me was the depiction of angels.
yeah.
Just evil, awful people
Yeah.
like throughout the whole thing.
I was kind of okay with it when God was not involved and it was just angels kind of running the show, because that honestly is not the most inaccurate thing that they could have done. Spoiler alert, God is not actually gone in the show. Just he's
writer,
stepped
right.
he stepped back a bit, you know. So I think it's just
I don't have a hand in there.
I just think it's I get it from a script writing perspective, and I think Eric Kripke is a genius as far as being a showrunner and a creator. I don't know how much he was involved after season 5 though, and I feel like after season 5 they just kind of like totally lost the plot on good and evil, and it was just everyone's evil except Dean. Like,
pretty much. Yeah.
um,
Everyone's evil except Dean. Yeah.
dang.
Anyway, I would say, to give you some advice, the best direction to go with that is make him trickster, right? He can be sympathetic, he can understand people, because that's how he's often depicted, right? Like when he came to, I'm talking in the Bible, like when he came to Eve, didn't be like, boo, I'm the devil, haha. He came to her and said, oh, well, you know the reason you can't touch the apple is because you'll be God, and God wouldn't want that.
Yeah.
Like he's appealing to her ego in order to get what he wants. So like the wickedness of the trickster. That's okay. So for example, like Paradise Lost,
Mm-hmm.
the whole thing with that is that he was angry and hateful, and he was like a trickster figure. And what people took from that is like, oh, he's misunderstood, which is not the point that was trying to get across. If you make him as someone who's capable and also just malevolent in a sly way, don't depict. I would also say equally as bad as the sad boy depictions of Lucifer is the horned devil forked-tongued depiction of Lucifer. That is also not biblical, because you do not see the devil coming. He appears as everything you ever wanted, right? So more of a trickster figure than an emo rocker depiction.
You got to be careful with using the term trickster, because there is a conspiracy theory going around right now that Christianity is just Loki
I know,
trying to rewrite the whole. And
I've seen it.
it's annoying because people will tag me in it, and I'll explain why it's BS, and then people will like call me a party pooper, and I'm like, okay, but I was asked to explain this. Like, people asked me to explain this. I'm not just I didn't just see this video and decide, you know what, I'm a guy with 1.2 million followers on TikTok. I'm gonna dunk on a smaller creator today. No, I was asked. Like, that's not just what I'm doing. Professor Donger, again, you guys are killing it with the names. Professor Donger says, how do you handle people who constantly say things like Christianity is a cult, or try and blame everything wrong in the world on Christians? And while you formulate an answer to that, I'm going to run to the bathroom.
Okay. Thank you very much. So blah 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 while he's walking away, blah blah blah. Hey, you guys are really cool. Thank you for the donations. Aiden's really going to appreciate it. What he doesn't know is that I'm going to refuse the donations, because as I said, or I'm going to refuse my cut for this episode, because as I said earlier, we need to get him doing YouTube full time. So it really does mean a lot. I greatly appreciate it. You guys are fantastic. So thank you all very much. For the question about what was the, I always forget the question after I do that hinge spiel. Oh, what do I say to people who say that like Christianity is a cult and evil and whatnot? It is the same way that you would approach anyone with an idea who does not like your idea, right? If someone is vehemently like, these are my beliefs, you don't just tell them they're wrong, right? If I come up to someone who says like Christianity is a cult and church evil and all that stuff, I'm not going to be like, idiot. Like, that doesn't get anything done. If it depends on the kind of person too, right? If they're just someone who's mad and wants to be mad, and they just want to keep being like, oh, here's a gotcha. You're not supposed to eat shellfish. Oh, here's another thing. Job, yeah, what do you got to say about that, idiot? Or like they don't actually care to know. They just want to be upset. You can't really do anything there. Like if someone, it's literally the same premise as a bully, right? If a bully wants to be mean to you, they're going to find a reason to be mean at you. It's not like if someone says that your hair's bad, if you cut your hair, that'll fix it. Like they're going to continue to be mean. So well, there we go. As we mentioned earlier, pearls before the swine. If someone's purpose is to just be mean and be upset, you're not going to help them with reason. Now, however, someone's legitimately curious. If their question is, well, I just think, that Christianity is evil, it's that. And to some degree, I would agree with them. I would say that a lot of the religion, not the belief, the religion of Christianity has caused a lot of hurt. A bunch of people, as I mentioned earlier, have touted the flag of God to do evil. And I would relate to them on that. I would say, yes, I agree that there are a lot of evil people who do bad things in the name of God. But do you know what happens when people properly do the things of God? And just like talk to him as a friend. In both situations, both with the person who just wants to be mad and someone who's legitimately curious, and this is the people out there who are a Christian or believe in God, I cannot stress this enough, the most important tool you have is your testimony. The way that you behave, the reputation you have with others. Because if you say you're a Christian and you stab your friends in the back, you gossip, you run your mouth, you get into fights, whatever. If you are just as bad as everyone else, they are not going to look to you or your solutions as being the way out. They're going to look to you as another person who's everyone else. If you ruin your testimony, I cannot stress this enough, ruining your testimony, as mentioned with Ananias and Sapphira, right? Ruining your testimony has detrimental consequences to you and the souls of those around you. If someone is upset, if they just want to be mad, and they see you not reacting to that, if you keep your temperaments and your patience, that will speak to them more than you yelling back at them about how Christianity isn't evil ever will. The same if someone legitimately wants to know. If someone comes to me and is like, I think Christianity's wrong, if I'm like, well, I think you're wrong, idiot. Does that help? That just gratifies me. That doesn't do anything. But if I say, yeah, I see where you're coming from with that, let's talk about it. That's again a testimony going forward. Like the biggest thing that matters with this is the same thing that Aidan and I talked about when it comes to friendship. Like if you are just as miserable and awful all the time as everyone else, your friend's not going to come to you whenever he feels down or depressed. But if you are seen as sort of a lighthouse for people to follow, then they might. With any part of Christianity, it just comes down to maintaining yourself so that you can be someone to look to, not someone to bring others down. When it comes to people like that, I would say that's the application. Be understanding above all else, because a lot of people, how I mentioned that your testimony can ruin reputation for those people, a lot of people who just blindly hate Christianity have good reason for it. There's a lot of people who, some, physical abuse when they were young, some who dealt with emotional abuse at the hands of some churches, and rightfully so. If that's all they ever known, they're going to be mad about it. I would be mad about it too. Way that you are going to deal with that is to not be like the abuse they came from, not to be mad and upset and yelling. It's to be different, because when they see you as being different, that's what speaks volumes. So just be understanding. Whenever Christ was confronted by people who didn't want to hear what he's saying or yelled at him, he never mocked them, he never spit at them, he spoke with compassion. That's what did more than any gotcha or zinger to come back with ever could. So that's also one of the reasons that people argue on Twitter about Christianity all the time. They'll be like, well, this idiot doesn't know God. And sometimes I admit it is funny when you see the funny Chad Wojak memes or whatever of a guy with a cross or responding. And it's like, yeah, those are funny, but you're not doing anything different. A lot of the times the reason people say inflammatory stuff about Christians is they know Christians will respond inflammatory and they just want to see a rise. Just be different, be better. So that's the best advice I can give.
Yep. I'm totally with you on that one. I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just scrolling through looking for we got more chats rolling in. Got
cool.
Professor Donger again, 5 says, also thank you both for this content. I started watching Wendigoon last year and found out about Lore Lodge through him. Keep up the great work. Well, thank you. And thank you, Isaiah, for exposing more people to me.
Absolutely, my man.
We've also got from Ko Hilchenko, I believe is how that would be pronounced, for $5 Canadian. Are there any good resources online to learn about theology and whatnot? Also, when are we getting the Lore Lodge Hawaiian shirt? I would love to come up with a Lore Lodge Hawaiian shirt. I just have absolutely cool. No idea how to do it. I think it would probably just be the logo all over it. I don't really know. I'll think of something. But good resources online for theology. If you're more into some of the more mystical side of things, the stuff that I talk about pretty regularly, I very much recommend Dr. Michael Heiser's work. He's on YouTube. He's got a blog. He's also got an entire website called SitchinIsWrong.com, which is about why Zechariah Sitchin was full of BS, which I recommend. He also has a great takedown of Dan McClellan that is probably the most politely worded shut up I've ever read. And Dan is the guy who keeps telling everybody that that Judaism was polytheistic, even though it wasn't, and then hiding behind his degree. Because apparently him having a PhD means he can't be wrong about the Bible, which I have news for him about the many PhDs who have been wrong about the Bible throughout history. But as far as good resources go, the one everyone should know about is Bible Gateway. Bible Gateway, I forget if it's .org or .com, but if you look at Bible Gateway, it'll be the first result. It just has, you can read basically any translation of the Bible that's ever been written. It has study Bibles. It has commentaries. Just if you're ever sitting there, you want to read it, but you're not sure, or you have one translation, you want to compare it to another. That's a really, really good one. As far as things like YouTube go, Inspiring Philosophy. We had him on the show a few weeks ago. He's great. There are some things that I disagree with him on, but he's a very honest guy and is, rhetorically consistent, and I really appreciate that about him. So I'd say he's another great option. But you got to be careful because with the internet, you can find something that looks totally legit and it turns out to not be at all. So just remember to take everything you find about theology on the internet, and it's always better to compare it to someone else's work and see if they came to the same conclusion. The best theological works you're ever going to find are still from the early church fathers, though. Augustine of Hippo is somebody you should read. You should read Aquinas. Who else? Who else is a good one? Obviously, the Bible. But you should read through the Nicene Creed. If you go and look up the stuff from the Council of Constantinople, that's also a very good one. I would start there. I would just use the internet for what it is, a vast digital library, and start with the early church fathers, because nobody knew Christianity better than the people who canonized it and compiled it. Yeah.
The guys who started it.
Yeah, because these guys are like, only a few generations removed from Christ himself and his apostles. So, things get muddy after the Roman Empire adopts Christianity as its state religion. But before that, you have some people who, you have people who were writing who knew the direct successors of Peter and Paul and all of these other apostles. So that's the closest you're going to get. Use the internet as the digital library that it is my recommendation. And of course, Isaiah's Sunday school episodes, his Sunday studies.
They're just like cute little Bible stories and stuff, but they do mean a lot.
I just think you do a really good job of talking about it and making it something that people can understand.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And honestly, it's inspiring a lot of the time. Like there's been something you've said every single one of these, and I'm like, man, I hope somebody clips that. That was a really good little piece, because I know for me to go back and watch all 3 hours of one of these is going to be like a pain to get those clips. We have one from Skull for $49.99. Wow, thank you. As some weird music boy who's trying to get his passion full time, have my last bit of change for my last commission. You didn't need to do that, man, but thank you. If you guys ever need any custom background music, we'd love to make some for either of you. Either way, keep up the good work, you guys. Yeah, I mean, we just had our first bit of background music written for us. It is honestly really exciting. But we have been told that we need ambient background music for our videos. So if you have ideas, send them to us. We're pretty limited on budget, but we can we can, if we like it and it's something we want to use, we can absolutely try and throw something your way and work out a deal for like, you know, a repayment if it's something else, or you want like, you know, if you write our theme song and you want a percentage of profits that come from those episodes, that's something we're happy to work out. And then I don't know about you, Isaiah, if you're looking for music or not.
Yes, I'm sorry. I was
You're
reading
fine.
through the chat.
I figured.
Five more questions. But yes, I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
We do have a question of somebody's asking what based means.
No.
I don't even know how to answer that question. It's just
don't tell. The short version is that so you have opinions or reality or stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The original root word is that it's based on something.
Yeah.
Like you have values that actually mean something more than just what feels good, do it. Like a principled person, essentially. But now it's devolved into a way to say something that's cool, but also outside of the norm.
Yeah,
edgy. Yeah.
And when somebody says based, it usually means that they agree with you, or that you know, you're saying something that whether they agree with it or not is at least, you know, interesting.
It's good, basically. Job.
Based is generally a positive.
That's hopefully.
Floriana G says, thanks for the great stream, and I appreciate that it was a longer one. Keep up the great work. Thank you, and we will continue to keep up the great work, or at least the decent work. Not everything can be great all the time. Let's see. We have another one from Ko Hilchenko. This is extra for not pronouncing my name as Chow. It's what everyone does. At first I thought it was Kato, and then I was like, wait, that's an I, not a T. But yeah, I'm glad I hope I got it right. I'm glad I didn't do what everyone does. The Artsy Nerd for 5 says, would you say that your religious background helps you with research and explanations in your videos? I would say that my religious education background definitely helps a lot. And it, you know, being open to the stories of the Old Testament where all of these more mystical things happen, and growing up with that has definitely helped me keep an open mind to the stories of other cultures. So yeah, I would say that my religious background has been a positive in terms of my research. So Isaiah, is for you?
Yes, mostly because my Christianity has defined me as a person. It's my roots for a lot of my beliefs and stuff. I've had people ask me because I do go down a lot of, I guess, dark rabbit holes. Like, how do you stay like positive going through all that and whatnot? Because I have a foundation that is bigger than whatever, you know, topic I search or whatnot. So yeah, I mean, it's put me this far. It's what's got me to this point. So yeah, I'd say so.
Ooh, we're out of super chats at this point, but there is an interesting one that I want to add that I like in here. In the Dante's Heaven video, did you ever realize that out of the 7 layers of heaven, only 7 layers have humans residing in it?
Yes. I had to think about what the question was asking. Yes. So Dante does that a lot, right? So every part, there's 3 parts, Trinity. Every part has 9 layers. That's 3 prime.
Mm-hmm.
Or not 3 prime, that's 3 squared. So you have no, not yes. Yeah, 3 squared.
3 squared.
You have like a paradigm of the Trinity, and each layer had like, you know, there are parts with like 7 sub layers. And I didn't go into it a lot in the videos.
It'd be 3 cubed. Because 9 layers, 3
times 3 is 9.
Yeah, but 9 times 3 is 27, which is 3 cubed.
Correct. Okay, yeah. So like the entire, I was talking about
each you're talking about the layer. Yeah, okay. Yeah. I see what you mean.
Then you are correct. It's 3 cubed for the entire thing. I didn't go into it a lot in the video, but there was a ton of numerology like that. There were parts where it talked about how there were 333 souls in certain layers, or it talked about how there were 12 seats gathered around, a mention of the 12, which is a number, biblical number. That stuff was all over there. But yes, I did notice how there were 7 layers that were filled with people, and then 2 that were upper divinity and whatnot. So yeah.
I actually haven't read Paradiso, so I'm gonna have to go back and watch your video on it.
It's really good. I cried. My video, the book, Paradiso.
I figured that's what you meant. I was wondering which part made you cry, honestly.
Well, I watched my own video. I'm like, it's so good. No.
All right. Well, is there anything else you wanted to talk about tonight?
Did we get through all those?
I
Wow,
think
you guys
so.
were fantastic. That was
Yeah,
thank you all very much.
there's so many
That means
good
a lot.
questions. I'm excited for next time we do this. Like,
Yeah. I did see one thing. Someone said it's not a question. They said, I don't know if I'm worthy of Christ.
you are.
Um, you are. Paul, arguably greatest Christian who ever lived, a job where he murdered Christians before he became one. David, the man after God's own heart, killed a man so that he could sleep with his wife. Um, everyone, Moses, the people who let the forefather
Mhm.
of the children of Israel, betrayed God and smote a rock that God told him not to. Like everyone is divine for faith. That's
Yep.
something that a bunch of the early Christians had trouble with. They asked, "How could God love me?" And Cornelius, who I mentioned earlier, the first Roman convert, asked, "How could he sacrifice himself for me?" And Peter said, "The point of it is he sacrificed himself for everyone, so that
Exactly.
every soul has the opportunity to know God." So, in short, you are worthy
Yeah.
of God. Well,
That's
let me put it this way: no, none of us are worthy. None of us earned God. It's in spite of us,
mhm.
God sacrificed Himself for everyone.
Yeah. So, but if that's ever your worry that you're not enough or you're not good enough, that's don't ever worry about that. What matters is that you're trying. Now, if you're not trying, try. But if you're trying, you're enough. That's the
And we
point.
go back to the whole agnostic thing, but
Chance Prevet says for $10, do you think people of other religious beliefs who prescribe to the light side go to heaven or hell? If you're a good human, are you damned if you don't believe in the Christian God? We touched on this a bit earlier. There is a range of belief systems about this. Uh, I was kind of in agreement with what you suggested in there. That if you're not exposed to Christianity and you act to be good, you try to be a good person, whether that's for your religion or just in general because that's who you want to be. I think that you are probably going to be in better standing than somebody who is Christian and does not follow Christ, or somebody who has been exposed and rejects it. So I'd say yeah. I think I think that's where the gray area is. That's where the tricky part is. But I would like to believe, based on my understanding of the Bible, that God does not, damn you to eternal torment just because you didn't know.
like I said earlier, I think God's grace is sufficient. A case I always thinking about is: are you familiar with the Ethiopian eunuch?
No.
So, in Acts, again, I know this because I've been doing a study of it with my class. Early on in Acts, Philip is walking through the city at Jerusalem, and there is an Ethiopian eunuch. A eunuch is essentially like a secondary person to a king.
Well, there's a very
Well,
specific thing that makes you a eunuch.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. We know. The eunuch, as it's mentioned here, was like a governor. He was a judge. It even says he was with the legion of the king as a ruler over a province, right? So I understand that a eunuch is someone who's castrated,
Yeah.
essentially. That was something that was done to people at the time, but this eunuch was a ruler over an area in Ethiopia. So this Ethiopian legion is traveling, and it says as Philip is walking by, he feels the Spirit tell him to go speak to this man. So he goes up to the Ethiopian eunuch, and the Philip says, "What are you doing?" And the eunuch is reading the book of Isaiah. He's reading the Old Testament. And he goes, "I wish someone could show me what this means." which Philip, one of the people who was with Jesus, just so happens to be there, and he's like, I think I could take a look at it for you."
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of my favorite passages from Isaiah that he's reading. He's reading the passage that says, "Was brought as a lamb to the slaughter, as a sheep before his shears is dumb." Which, for those that don't know, that is again the prophet Isaiah prophesying about when Christ comes, and he's saying that as a sheep is dumb, for those that don't know, when sheep go to the slaughter, they don't make noise. They're very quiet. They're just kind of led astray. And it says, just like that, Jesus went to the cross for us. He was humble. He was quiet about it. And I could go to... It's late, so I won't. I'm tempted to go to that part in Acts. But anyway, the eunuch says, essentially, how could this be? For one, who's this talking about? And Philip says, well, this is Jesus Christ. And it breaks me up because Philip's essentially like he was a friend of mine, but he was more so than any man I've ever met. And he tells him about his friend Jesus. And then the eunuch asks, how could he be silent at his own persecution? And Philip essentially says, well, I was there. It's because what he did was for me, and it's also for you. And essentially, Philip there decides to get him saved. So it says that the eunuch believes, and then he says, can I be baptized? Because baptism is a way to join the church. So Philip takes him to a river. He baptizes him, and it says, as Philip brought him above the water, Philip was caught away in a whirlwind and disappeared and was no more before the eunuch. So this eunuch is reading the book of Isaiah. As a guy come up to him, and he's like, can you tell me what this is about? This guy tells him about his friend Jesus, baptizes him, and then disappears into thin air. It says the eunuch went away shouting and rejoicing and told many of his people. All right. So that's like that's in the book of Acts, right? Fast forward to David Livingstone, one of the first David Livingstone was 1600s, right? He was 1800s.
It was Enlightenment era. I'll look up exactly when, but yeah, Enlightenment era.
Or like missionary. I feel like he may have been 1800s. It was one of the early Enlightenment missionaries, one of the first English missionaries.
1813 he was born.
Yes, 1813. So it may not have been him. Whatever like the first missionaries who went to Africa is. These first missionaries get to Africa. They get to Ethiopia. And obviously there's a language barrier initially. But whenever the missionaries begin to go to people, they're like, hey, we want to tell you about Jesus. We want to tell you about all this. And the Ethiopians are like, okay, tell us. So they start to tell the story, and the Ethiopians were confused. And they're like, oh, well, let me tell you about my religion. And they called it was something like, it wasn't Christendom. It had Christ in it, whatever the name of it was. And the names were a little different, but they had the exact Christian faith. Like there was a figure named I don't think they called him Jesus. The name was a little different. They're like, yeah, he was born in Israel, and then he died on the cross, and through that we're saved. And they were like, the initial missionaries were confused. Imagine you go into the middle of a far off land, and they're like, no, yeah, we got the same book, we believe the same thing. And it turns out that this eunuch, according to the Ethiopian history, went back and began to just prophetize the word of God. And Ethiopia, like to this day, Ethiopia's primary religion is Christianity.
Yeah, it's very, very out of the ordinary for the region. Like,
yeah,
it's also one of the first. It's one of the very first regions referenced in the Bible too, which is fascinating. Like, if you had to look outside of the Jews for like the oldest versions of Judaism, if you were to look outside of Israel, you'd probably find them in Ethiopia. Which makes complete sense geographically, because Jews absolutely would have made it down into Ethiopia if they were interested while they were in Egypt.
Yeah, right. But for one, that gives me a lot of faith, because I think about how many years passed, how many generations passed between the Ethiopian eunuch and those missionaries getting to Ethiopia, right? All those years, the people who read the Bible in, say, Europe were like, I wonder what happened to that guy. that Ethiopian who walked back to Africa. And then sure enough, he continued the work. It was another piece of the mission field spreading out. That's not only encouraging to me, but then I ask myself, that was the word of God. It was a little different than what most people would say. The names were a little different. Stuff was changed around. But hey, that's translation, right? Then of all these other religions, and Aidan and I have talked about before how the grand unified religious theory, the idea that it all sparks from one place, is most likely, at least what I believe. So I don't know how much of these other religions is belief. I don't know how much of what is a piece of what I believe to be the truth. I don't know how much of that is enough. I know that whenever it becomes a religion that's full of hate and no trust and evil, I'm going to pretty positively say that doesn't count.
Yeah.
But out of the religions of goodwill, what does count? Because I know that Ethiopians does. I know that his salvation's no different than mine. So it does count. And again, I go back to what I said, that his grace is sufficient. So
exactly,
that's where I fall back on.
Plaz says Wendigoon is friend shaped. Also, check your Steam. I did see that. Thank you. Thank you for the gift. I will have to check it out tomorrow.
Someone gift you something on Steam?
Yeah, it was the game they were talking about earlier. So,
Oh, that's
yeah,
cool. Very nice.
I'm excited about that. I think they're also trying to subtly encourage me to start streaming again. Keo Hilchenko says ancient Israel treated other gods the same as God. Would you say they were polytheistic? Also, it's pronounced Kaio. All right, Kaio says. I would disagree that that Israel treated them as other gods. There were people who lived in Israel that did, but the religious leaders never did. Judaism as a religion never recognized the existence of other gods. Did it recognize the existence of the belief in other gods? Absolutely. Did it even recognize that these divine figures from other groups might be more than just totally made up? Yeah, but what are we talking about there? Are we talking about fallen angels? Or are we talking about God pretending that there aren't other gods? That doesn't make any sense. But the idea that these people might be worshiping demons, totally plausible in my opinion. I think, when you look at the way that Kamash is referenced in what is it? Is it Samuel? Kings? I think it's 2 Kings 3, I want to say.
Mosh?
Yeah, Kamash.
No, I don't think I'm a name familiar with Kamash.
So I'll pull it up. This is the source of why I don't like Dan McClellan, because this is the exact thing he and I had an argument over. So let me see. I feel like it's 2 Kings 3. Yeah. So you get to the end of it. If I remember, if I'm thinking about the right thing. Yeah, here we go. So there's a battle, there's a war between the Israelites and the Moabites, and the Israelites are winning it because God said, follow me, do as I say, fight the Moabites, you will win. And when all the Moabites heard that the kings were come up to fight against them, they gathered all that were able to put on armor and upward and stood in the border, and they rose up early in the morning, and the sun shone upon the water, and the Moabites saw the water on the other side as red as blood. And they said, this is blood, the kings are surely slain, and they have smitten one another, now therefore Moab to the spoil. And when they came to the camp of Israel, the Israelites rose up and smote the Moabites, that they fled before them, but they went forward, smiting the Moabites, even in their country. And they beat down the cities, and on every good piece of land cast every man his stone, and filled it, and they stopped all the wells of water, and felled all the good trees. Only in Kirahaseth left they the stones thereof, howbeit the slingers went about it, and smote it. And when the king of Moab saw that the battle was too sore for him, he took with him 700 men that drew swords to break through even unto the king of Edom, but they could not. And then he took his eldest son that should have reigned in his stead, and offered him for a burnt offering upon the wall. And there was a great indignation against Israel, and they departed from him and returned to their own land. The patron god of Moab was Chemosh, who is in the Canaanite pantheon. And I'm reading from the KJV, by the way. You'll get slightly different words for that last bit where it says great indignation. You get righteous fury, you get divine fury, you get great fury. One translation does say divine fury. And Dan took that to mean that Chemosh himself was present before the Israelites and drove them off. And in reality, what the Bible says here is that the sacrifice of the son caused a great indignation, a great fury against the Israelites. Is that the Israelites heard the chanting and the cheering of the Moabite soldiers and decided to go home? Possibly. Is that the Israelites got scared because they believed that, maybe Chemosh is real? Also possible. Does it mean that the Jewish religion at any point was polytheistic? No, not at all. He's referred to as in other parts of the book where he's referred to by name and they say Chemosh, he's referred to as the abomination Chemosh. So it seems to me like they're recognizing that there's something, that it exists, but not that it's a god, that it's a demon. That's my opinion on the subject.
There is a lot of stories in the Old Testament about the early Israelites, not even the Israelites, the people at the time, mixing God with other gods, and it never, ever ends well. The one I think about a lot is Dagon, the fish god.
The what?
He was like a fish, scaly thing, Dagon.
I believe so, yeah. The Mesopotamian one?
Yeah, he was like a fish tail like heads. But anyway, he was one of the statues that I believe the Canaanites worshipped. Um, there's one point in I think the book of Joshua or Judges, the Ark of the Covenant is stolen, and they bring it to the Canaanites, bring the Ark to their temple, and they give it as an offering to Dagon. So they leave the Ark of the Covenant with the statue. They come in the next morning, and the statue of Dagon has fallen over, and the arms have broken off of it. They're like, that's weird, and they set it back up and glue the arms back on. And the next day they come back, and the arms have fallen off of it. And that continues to happen as long as the Ark of the Covenant's in there. Now, that was to a group of people who were not followers of God. That was the Canaanites. Whenever the people who knew better try stuff like that, it's much more bombastic.
Yeah, they get punished.
Yeah, see, whenever Moses came down off the mountain with the 10 Commandments, and his brother Aaron had made the people a golden calf to worship. What's the wording there? The ground opened up and swallowed them.
It's something along those
like
lines.
That, yeah.
But like
yeah,
it just doesn't track. Like if you read Kings is where you get most of this, honestly. 1 Kings 11:7. Then did Solomon build an high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, in the hill that is before Jerusalem, and for Molech, the abomination of the children of Ammon. So there's really no like that's not saying they're gods. And then there is a point where I believe the word being used here is Elohim, which is one of the words for God, but it also gets used for men. So what it really means is like high or anointed or like a very powerful person. But you get because that they have forsaken me and have worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Zidonians, Chemosh, the god of the Moabites, and Milcom, the god of the children of Ammon, and have not walked in my ways to do that which is right in mine eyes, and to keep my statutes and my judgments as David did his father. So again, that's like we're talking about Solomon here. Like that they're in no, you can't read that and come to the conclusion that they were supposed to be worshiping these beings. That they're supposed. Yeah. It's no.
The one example I've heard from people who are like religious scholars who say that there's some legitimacy to the other gods thing is like Balaam. He was the guy. You remember the talking donkey?
Vaguely.
That's the one that got mentioned in Sunday school, and then no one ever talked about it again. There was a prophet by the name of Balaam. He was a prophet for the Ammonites.
I'm pulling it up right now. God, why is it
one,
always trying to give me the NIV?
One of the not God people. One of the people who fought. Beld want to say what group he was.
I'm looking for it.
Okay. Stand by.
Moab.
I was right. Moabites. Look at me. Anyway, he was a prophet for the Moabites, and he was a prophet of false gods. So if there's like the Bible, understanding of the Bible is a bell curve, right? Because it's like in Sunday school, like whatever you're taught, like there is God, and then these are false gods. They're just like statues. They don't mean anything, right? You're like, okay, and then you study the Bible, and there's this crisis of faith when you get to the top of the bell curve, and you're like, there were prophets who did miracles. Like an example is whenever Moses goes to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh's soothsayers can turn staffs into serpents. Yeah, Moses' staff swallows up those serpents, but those staffs still became serpents. It's like, oh, there's other gods.
It's almost like demons have power.
There you go. And then you study it a bit more, and you're like, oh, they line up with every demon that's mentioned throughout the Old Testament. So
if you've read the entire book, these are very obviously demons. Like, correct. It's not saying they don't exist. It's saying they're not gods. And
the bell curve of biblical understanding.
Yeah. and like for example, here's a good one from Jeremiah. Jeremiah 46 or 48, 6-8. Flee, save your lives, and be like the heathen in the wilderness. For because thou hast trusted in thy works and in thy treasures, thou shalt also be taken, and Chemosh shall go forth into captivity with his priests and princes together. So it's recognizing the existence of Chemosh, but it is not granting him deity status. So that's why I think, there's a lot of people who just outright be like, no, Christians don't believe in the existence of multiple divine figures. And then, like you said, there's the bell curve where you figure out that, oh, wait, yeah, we do. And then you figure out, oh, they're not gods.
Like, oh, yeah. So go back to your original Sunday school. They're pretty much just statues that the demons inhabited. You're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
That happens with every part in the of my biblical understanding.
Yeah.
It does strengthen my faith. Anyway, so what was it? Oh yeah, Balaam. So Balaam was a false prophet of the Moabites who was charged by the king of Moab to deliver a curse to the Israelites. I believe this is whenever Joshua was running things. So Balaam is on his way to deliver a curse, and it says his donkey sees an angel standing in the way, and the donkey refuses to go forward. And like it throws Balaam off. So Balaam pulls off. I think he has a reed. He starts whipping the donkey, and the donkey speaks to him. It says something like, "Why do you fear what you do not understand?" So something like his donkey says something to the effect.
I'm not gonna lie. If a donkey looked up at me and went, "Why do you fear that which you do not understand?" I would run. I would be terrified.
Well, that's what he did. It says he was shocked and afraid, which
it's a reasonable response.
As soon as that happened, he sees the angel. He's like, "Oh, that's what the donkey was afraid of." And the angel tells him something along the lines of, "You are a powerful prophet. You are going to deliver this message for me." And what happens is Balaam, whenever he goes to curse the children of Israel, every time he like throws out his jewels or whatever to make a curse, he's like, "Okay, so they're actually going to be blessed." And the king's like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, they're going to have many years and they'll be given the land." So the king's like, "Okay, let's go do it at another mountaintop." So they walk to another mountaintop, and he does it again. He's like, "Oh man, they're going to win every battle they fight." And that happened like 4 times before the king gave up. So, but that's an example of a false prophet who has power. But again, Moabites gods line up with biblical demons. So
yeah, and the thing is, they also line up with demons from other religions. I think there's a weird disconnect between Christianity and other religions where we're not denying the existence of other celestial beings. We're saying that they're not gods. They don't have creative juice. Like they're, and I think people just like don't make the connection. And then they'll go to things like Easter is pagan, and I'm like, okay, I give up. Like, if I explain to you how Easter etymologically comes from Passover, and you still tell me it's a pagan holiday, I'm going to lose it with you. I've given up. There are a few arguments where I will simply just say no. Like this is a lost cause. That's one of them, because that's not even religion. That's etymology. Like it's Pasha in almost every single language except English.
You can't help some people.
No. Cody97 for $2 says, "Loved y'all's videos. God bless from a fellow Appalachian."
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Someone did ask the question. It says all this stuff about the Canaanites' gods is from Christian Jewish perspective. Is there any existing written sources from the Canaanite perspective?
Yes. They are not nearly as plentiful, but there are inscriptions and artwork and statues. I think there is, to an extent, some written stuff.
There's records of the human sacrifice, right?
Yeah, but that's a lot of that's recorded by the Egyptians and the Greeks. You got to remember that the Canaanites did survive the Bronze Age collapse. They just weren't the Canaanites anymore. They were the Phoenician cities. And so a lot of most of what we know about Canaanite religion comes from a combination of very, very, very ancient, like post-Bronze Age, Dark Age artifacts, as well as Roman and Greek writings on the Carthaginian religion, which was a direct descendant of the Canaanite religion. They also worshipped Baal and Tanit and all of the same gods the Phoenicians did. So we know quite a bit about the Canaanite religion in its late form. We don't know as much about it in its earlier middle form. And then, of course, it was totally wiped out by the Greeks and Romans. Glass of Strawberry Milk asks, I love strawberry milk, by the way. Very underrated beverage. Fantastic recovery drink after working out, by the way. It says, any opinions on VIP Christianity, such as Hillsong, Elevation Worship, mega churches? Do you think they're a little disconnected? I think Joel Osteen has a very, very, very long road to redemption after he dies. And I think that goes for just about any of them.
Man, you aimed straight for the just finger on the trigger. You're ready to go with that.
I mean, think about it. He's a charlatan. They all are. Like,
oh, I'm not saying anything.
Yeah, I didn't
say you were wrong. But
if you're in a church that big, you do not know your flock, and that's the job of a pastor. The word literally comes from pastoralism. It comes from being a shepherd. If you are a pastor, your title is literally shepherd. If you can't name every sheep in your flock, you probably have too many sheep and need a helping hand. You probably need another pastor.
That's not even to necessarily say that being successful and having a big church is wrong. It's more so the handling of it. I know I went to bigger churches, I think did a great job, because there were like 3 assistant pastors, and everyone was like and the pastor himself was very in touch and personal with everyone in the congregation, very close friends. He was a full-time pastor, of course, so he would, come to their aid at a moment's notice. There was a big congregation, but he did it right.
Exactly.
So
it's possible.
Behavior of it. Yes. Yeah.
It's possible to have a very large congregation and still be a good pastor, but I look at Joel Osteen's house. Not a single pastor on this planet, not a single priest, not a deacon, not a pope should have a palace or a mansion. Like, I mean, I can't think of anything more un-Christ-like about than to, be a servant of God living in a mansion while you have people in your congregation who are suffering, who are poor, who are starving. Like, if Joel Osteen sold his mansion and gave out free food to all of the poor people in his congregation, that would be Christian.
Yeah.
It's okay to have a big house, just don't be a pastor. Don't be the example for your community and also be living an opulent, excessive lifestyle.
There's also, to clarify, there are certain rules given to pastors that are not for everyone, right? In the New Testament, there's rules given to New Testament pastors that does not mean they're rules to follow for everyone. So they're held to a higher degree because they have a higher reward and more is at stake. So,
yeah, like it was the same thing with what we talked about with Ananias and Zephoria. Is that her name?
Zephaniah.
Yeah, it's the same thing as with that. The reason they're being punished is that they're supposed to be better, and they're not.
That's correct.
So that's how I feel about all of them, honestly. I don't know a ton about Hillsong, but I do. The one I know is Joel Osteen's church, and I don't like that. I understand that it's possible to make money as a pastor, but that doesn't mean you should do it.
That also, on that same note, yeah, like what you said, like obviously guys got to eat, guys got to provide for his family, and that doesn't mean he should have a vagabond lifestyle, but there is a point. What was that I just saw? Totally lost my train of thought.
You're fine.
Yeah, I was gonna say something. That's not to discredit people who have had experiences or even salvation through someone like Osteen.
Mm-hmm.
Like, salvation is of God. It doesn't matter what mobile you first heard it through or whatever. That's not to devalue any of that. It's just like, some rules that Timothy gave that aren't exactly being addressed, so to speak.
So for $4.99 from Skull, we have one more thing. I'm obligated as a lad in a wheelchair to say the stairs in the forest are super ableist. Where are my spooky ramps at? Dude, I will design a t-shirt for spooky ramps. That I will, or we'll make something about like ADA compliant cryptids.
That's pretty good.
Also, something I learned recently is apparently ADA compliance is very American, and Europe is not accessible for handicapped people, and I think that's funny. Not funny because handicapped people can't travel to Europe, but funny because like for all the times Europe gets on our case for like our social problems, at least we have handicapped protections. Like,
At least they're allowed to participate in society.
Let's see. I know we've got two other ones. An orangutan. They're developing consciousness, the orangutans. For $2 says, does time only apply to us in the mortal plane? I think... I don't understand dimensions past the third one very well. I am not good at physics. I know that there are people who have theories about 4 and 5 dimensional existence. I don't understand them. I cannot comprehend them. I think God probably does experience time in a very different way than we do.
Yes. My theory is yeah, but I have no doctrine behind that. I'm just like, that makes sense. But
yeah,
that's all I got.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a very, very satisfying answer for that. I think that, you know, there's stuff we don't understand. And for me, it's very literal. It's not like a mystical we don't understand. Like, I don't get it. I do not understand 4-dimensional existence. Physicists have tried to explain it to me. Continues to fail. The one thing I understand is that, like, you know, you can, I guess, move. Like, there was one where it was about approaching a black hole, and how as you approach the black hole, you kind of get sucked into. You're still moving, but time slows down for some reason because of the way the light is interacting, and I don't get it, but yeah.
Yeah.
You know, Sequitur Tenebris says Jesus was a socialist then. LOL. Not to diverge into politics, but Jesus' whole thing was do this because it's right, not do this because the government is holding a gun to your head and forcing you to, which is what socialism is at the end of the day. Regardless of how democratic it is, whenever it doesn't matter if you vote into forcing people to give you stuff, it's still using the authority of the state. So I don't think that Jesus would have approved of, like, Stalin or Marx. I don't think that would be his thing. But I would say Christianity definitely does emphasize communitarianism, and, you know, being an active member of your community and providing for the needy and not having too much excess in your life. So I'd say yes, like a lot of concepts that get wrapped into socialism, yeah, but Jesus also probably would have liked Freemasonry for the same reason, and Freemasonry has absolutely nothing to do with government. So I think that, you know, we're so quick in the modern day to ascribe things to various political ideologies.
Sure about that, Aidan? You sure that Masons have nothing to do with the government? You're positive on that one? Okay,
Aidan? Some of us have been. Some of us have led the government. It's not the goal, though. You got me there. You got me there.
I think it's just convenient that for such a small group of people, so many of them are in the top offices. I'm kidding.
You're starting to sound like a different kind of conspiracy theorist.
No.
I just want to make sure that we're aware we're not going down that road.
I didn't do that. I was talking about.
I know. I just want to make sure I gave you the opportunity to clarify.
Take back everything nice I said. Cancel this guy right now. Quick, do it.
But yeah, I think we are so quick to ascribe, like, things to various political ideologies, but at the same time, I think most, like, capitalists and socialists would agree that it's good to provide for the needy. They just disagree on how to do it. So I think that, you know, people try very hard to make things, you know, fit into a political box, and they just are not going to. There are some things that transcend politics, and I think that if we all agreed on that, accepted that, we'd probably be a lot happier in general. You know, just because you and I both agree in feeding the poor does not mean that, you know, we have to be the same political party. And most of the things that you hear from politicians and pundits and everything are meant to divide you so that people can remain in control. If you just loved your neighbor, we'd have a lot less problems.
Yeah.
What if DB Cooper never existed and it was just the two pilots in the flight? It was required that I answer Natalie's text. She did text me. She asked if we would get bar mitzvahed on stream. I don't know how that would work. Aren't we too old for that? I'm like...
Yeah, isn't that a 13 or 12-year-old thing?
I'm like I'm an entire lifetime of mine late for that. Like I am almost 25.
Also not Jewish religiously
Yeah, or culturally.
or culturally,
Ethnically.
so
Yeah.
or ethnically. Yeah. I mean, my grandmother was, but I don't think
Yeah.
that counts.
Yeah, to answer Cernini, yeah, we know Jesus's beliefs. Trying to apply modern political ideology onto people who lived 2,000 years ago is just not a good idea. It just doesn't fit. It doesn't work. People like to do it because they feel like, oh, well, if I can pin this religious leader as having my ideology, then that somehow makes it more legitimate. But in reality, you're probably just speaking for somebody. And it's like using an eisegetic reading instead of an exegetic reading. You're trying to apply later concepts to a very old person. But you still looking for?
I'm just
scrolling.
looking at the comments as people are yeah. So cut my hand really bad.
How'd you cut your hand?
I was.
Oh my god. Of all the accidents you can have with a handgun, cutting your hand somehow seems like the least likely one.
I was dry firing it and flipped the safety on, so I went to rack it and my hand caught the rear side and was bleeding. So leave me alone. Just keep talking. Keep going with your questions.
Well, we're out of super chats and it is almost 11 p.m. So
we have been going a while.
We've been going a while. We're at almost 4 hours here. So.
Wow, man.
But this was a great stream. We had so many good questions. I feel like we got to cover so many topics. I'm excited for the next one. We'll have to think of what the topic's going to be. But that will be August.
We're gonna have to try now.
Yeah. Now we have a solid 300 people who watch Night of.
Lot.
So yeah.
Pretty cool. Thank you all so much.
Yeah.
It means a lot.
Thank you guys. Everyone have a great rest of your evening. I wish everyone a happy Monday tomorrow. And we will see you in a month or so. Bye, guys.
See ya.